What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto joined a secret ninja dating tournament? And every fight was to win his heart. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. Wendy didn't regret her decision at all. She didn't regret moving in front of an attack that had been aimed at those that she had considered her brothers. She didn't regret saving them, and maybe the thought was bit tall. They were dragon slayers after all, and some of the most powerful mages in Fury. She may have acted preemptively and maybe they could have reacted in time, but still. She didn't regret her decision. Wendy was sad that her actions would upset her brothers. There was no doubt about that. She cared dearly about them, all of them, and she had no doubt about their love for her either. She hated that she wouldn't be able to be there for them anymore, to be able to fight alongside them, to reach new heights with them unlike ever before, to heal their wounds and comfort them when they were weary. She was going to die young, not even 15 years old yet, but still. She saved them, and that was all that mattered to her. A smile formed on her face as she lay on the hard ground, blue hair scattered around her like a halo. Her eyes stared at the sky blearily as darkness creeped near the edges of her vision. She couldn't feel her torso anymore, but she knew that she was bleeding out heavily. She couldn't muster up any more magic. Her senses were rapidly leaving her, but faintly, she could hear the sound of enraged screaming, a sound of pure desperation and rage. A figure moved beside her, hands moving across her torso, and there was a sense of pressure. She focused as hard she could, trying to comprehend what was happening. "Wendy, you need to hold on. Listen me, Wendy. Don't give yet, Wendy. Wendy. God damn it, brat, don't you dare." Gajeel was above her, she realized. His long black hair was like a veil of darkness, and there was a look of helplessness in his ruby-red eyes that she's seen on a handful of occasions before, and she felt a pang of guilt. She didn't want them to feel that way. She did it because she wanted to, because she loved them. The others were swiftly gathering around her, each with a look of sadness. Natsu, Gajeel, Laxus, Sting, Rogue, and Cobra. Her brothers. Her family of choice. Wendy. Natsu choked out, tears gathering in his olive-green eyes. His hand gently cradled hers like it was the most delicate of glass. "Don't go, please, Wendy. I can't lose you. Not you too." She gathered what strength she had left. She couldn't leave them like this. "Don't," she rasped out. "Don't be sad, please," she said, a smile forming on her face despite the agonizing pain. "I did it because I love you all, so please, don't be sad," she said, her voice fading into a whisper, but she knew that they all heard her perfectly. "Don't stop following your dreams. Become the best that you can be, and know that I'll be fine. I'll always be there with you all." Tears were running down their faces, even the hardiest of them all. They surrounded her like a shield against the chaos of the world, protecting her even in her last moments. It made her smile widen, and she wanted to cry, but not out of fear, but out of contentment. Her free hand was gathered as well, held just as delicately as the other by Sting. Rogue pushed away the hair from her face, his hand trembling all the while. "Wendy," he said, voice hoarse. "Don't worry, we'll always hold you dear in our hearts," he said, because as much as he hated to admit it, help would arrive too late, and none of them knew anything about healing magic. It was too late to even burn her wound closed. She'd bled out too much already, and the wound was too deep. "We love you, Wendy," Natsu said, head bowed as tears flowed freely. "Don't forget that." His torso shook with the force of his emotions, and he wanted to destroy everything in sight. But he couldn't. That wasn't what Wendy would want him to do. Wendy didn't have the strength to keep her eyes opened anymore, her vision was darkening. She could faintly hear the sounds of their increasing desperation, begging her not to go despite her words. "It's okay," she thought. "I'll always be watching over you all." Her vision went dark, her breath stuttered, and so did her heart. Wendy took one last breath, and then, everything stopped. Wendy. It was weird, Wendy decided. She wasn't sure what death was supposed to be like. She'd thought that she'd lose all awareness, but instead she felt like she was wide awake, surrounded by darkness and warmth. There was no sign of life, and she was alone. It made for a very lonely place, and there was no sense of time. She couldn't call out to anyone, and all she had were her thoughts for company. She had a sense of being, but she had a hunch that she was formless, as weird as it was. It was alarming, but then again, Wendy was pretty sure that she had died. For all she knew, what she was experiencing might have been normal. As she stayed in the darkness, her thoughts always strayed to her brothers. She thought about them more than she did her guildmates, and she didn't even feel guilty about it. They meant more to her, as much as it sounded harsh. They were her family, so like her. She had spent a long time alone, had been abandoned by Jelal despite his best intentions, had been broken when she found out that her guild cage shelter was nothing more than an illusion. She had found Fairy Tail and it had helped, yes, but what had helped her the most was finding Natsu and Gajeel, and then later on Laxus and the others. They had smelled like home and felt like it too. Instinct drove them together, but what had really cemented it was the aftermath of Tenryujima and the Grand Magic Games. She had gained the family that she had always dreamed of having. They had all become strong together. She had become strong, stronger than she'd ever thought possible. She had battled against a dragon and won. She had unlocked her second origin and had even gained her dragon force, and it had been amazing. She'd finally forgotten and forgiven the pain that Grandine had caused her for leaving. She hadn't wanted to, but when she had left, Wendy had felt angry, betrayed, and most of all saddened. When she had found Kate Sith, she thought that she had found her solace as well. But when the incident with Nirvana happened and her guild had turned out to be an illusion, those feelings had returned with vengeance, but this time, her sadness overwhelmed her. Fairy Tail had helped her overcome these emotions, specifically with the help of its dragon slayers that had later became her world. She would have loved to have spent more time with them, to have risen to the sky and above with them and achieved the unachievable. Still, it had been good run while it lasted. Wendy had slipped into unawareness not long after. She'd gone into a dream-like state and her thoughts had been blissfully blank, but that all changed as well when her world of warmth and darkness had become something blindingly bright and brutally cold. She had cried in alarm, not understanding what was happening. What was more startling, however, was the fact that she finally gained a faint sense of her body, a body that she'd been unaware of for so long in her darkness. She couldn't move, however. When she tried, her body wouldn't obey her, and that only amplified her feeling of confusion. What is going on? Wendy thought, giving a cry when she felt something engulf her. Her cries slowed when she felt a warmth battling against the cold, but still, her heart was pounding fast in her chest as she tried to gain some sense of comprehension as to what was happening. Her vision was blurry and her hearing was muffled, but they cleared up a few moments later. It would have been deeply unsettling as a dragon slayer with senses far surpassing those of others, to have been reduced to something so different and limited. There were people, she realized, and they were so much bigger than her, like the giants that Team Natsu had found frozen. They wore white and clothing that one might suspect doctors wore, or at least those that worked in hospitals. The walls were a pale color and she took in what she could see as she had little control of her body and couldn't even turn her head much. She vaguely realized that she was in a hospital. But what did that mean for her? Why was she in a hospital? Wasn't she supposed to be dead? She was sure that her wounds had been fatal. A person towered over her, almost intimidatingly so, but she beat back her fear. She wasn't a scared little girl anymore that needed others to defend her. She could hold her own now, was powerful enough to surpass those even older than her. "What's her name?" he said, eyeing the wiggling baby with vague interest. A voice called out. "I think it's Asuka-chan." "No last name?" "No, we weren't able to identify the mother." "Identify?" "Asuka-chan is an orphan. Her mother died in childbirth and there's no sign of the father. We weren't able to find any relatives either." "That's tragic, isn't it?" There was a sigh. "Yeah, I guess she'll have to go to an orphanage then." "Yeah, hopefully she gets adopted, but I mean, it's a long shot." "Did you see her eyes?" "Who didn't? They look like his." "You don't think?" "It couldn't be. I mean, just the thought is ridiculous. Her eyes aren't the right shade either. They're more gold than yellow." Wendy didn't understand what was happening to her, but then it dawned on her. The white room, the towering people, the warmth and sharp coldness. She easily put it all together, but the idea was so far-fetched. Was rebirth possible? Was it because of magic? It could be possible considering that with magic, the possibilities were limitless. Maybe it wasn't so far-fetched as she thought. After all, there was magic that manipulated even time itself, the lost magic, Arc of Time, although it did come at a steep cost. But that meant that she was a baby again. It also brought a plethora of other questions such as when and where had she been reborn? Was she even in Fury anymore? Or even Earthland? A nagging feeling told her no, but the only thing she could do to get any real answers was wait. She didn't like it, but she had no choice. At least one thing was certain, she was happy that she had saved her brothers, even at the cost of herself. She was sad that she had no parents, no family to her name. She was apparently now Asuka, reminiscent of Bisca's and Alzak's daughter. It felt weird having a new name, but she would have to get used to it as well, to the idea that she was a baby once again. What happened after was a haze that seemed to last for a long time. She vaguely remembered being moved, of being fed something that tasted odd to her tongue, of being passed around to different arms. She slept most of the time and she stayed unnervingly quiet, still stuck in shock and disbelief. Her behavior was odd to her caretakers, that is, to the head of the orphanage that now housed her. It was an orphanage that was overpopulated, mostly due to the fact that many children had been left with no families due to the Nine Tails. It was sad truth and reality. Still, they were lucky that they received the appropriate funding. There weren't many caretakers in the orphanage, but there were just enough to take care of the children, all varying ages. To them, Asuka was an oddity that wasn't going to be tolerated. Wendy eventually grew up to the point where she could control her movements. As soon as she could walk, she did. When she was alone, she practiced walking until her movements were smooth as well as talking. She carefully enunciated her words. The language was so different from her own, but she learned with determination and she read what little books she had. She made sure to act her age around others, appearing to be nothing else but a child that was somewhat more intelligent than average. Wendy wanted to fit in, but she gave up on that the moment that she realized that as much as she tried, they all steered clear of her, though there were of those that made their displeasure very much known. She stopped trying to fit in, realizing that it wasn't worth it to change herself. Her brothers wouldn't have approved and neither did she. It was hell, to put it bluntly. Asuka didn't understand why they treated her the way they did. The older children would call her mean names, taunting her blue-colored hair and golden eyes, something that she didn't expect to have. They also reminded her of the fact that she had no last name, told her that no one really wanted her. The younger children also took note of the older children and they followed suit, throwing childish taunts but hurtful just the same. Her attempts to make friends were rebuffed, sometimes violently. After many failed attempts, Asuka stopped trying. It saddened her deeply and it only accented the loneliness that she felt. It hurt to be treated the way she was. It appalled her really, the stark difference between where she now resided and Magnolia. The people were cruel, nothing like the kindness of the people of Magnolia. Asuka was sure that her treatment was known to the caretakers, and when she had asked that something be done, the answer that was given shocked her and it hurt. Asuka had approached the headmistress, hesitant but at the same time determined to get answers. "Rei-san," Asuka greeted, voice small but strong. She was young, no older than 3, but she was largely independent, mostly out of necessity. "May I have a moment of your time?" Rei was young, barely into her mid-20s. She had dark brown hair pulled into a severe bun, young and had a shapely figure. She would have been beautiful had it not been for the stern frown that she had on her face. She usually wore casual utakas and simple sandals. At first, Asuka had thought that the woman was incapable of smiling, but she was proven wrong when she spied an encounter between the headmistress and another orphan. She had been kneeling in front of him, soothing his crying with gentle sounds and touches. She had given him a reassuring smile, seeming in that instant like the motherly figure that Asuka had greatly desired. It seemed that after that, there wasn't a moment where Asuka didn't see encounters such as those. It was then that she realized that yes, Rei was a maternal woman, but it was only her that she singled out. Each encounter with Rei, despite Asuka's politeness, was greeted with a severe frown and hostility. "Don't," Rei said, eyes turning to glare at Asuka's small figure. A figure dressed in what could labeled as nothing more than rags. "Call me that. Address me as Rei-sama and nothing else. Am I understood?" she said, her voice cold and cutting. Asuka nodded, hesitant and confused. Her palms were lined with cold sweat and there was a feeling of dread rising in her. Her nose was twitching slightly, and it was then that she realized that it was because of the prominent scent of something sour, something that she idly identified as anger, as well the bitter scent of fear. She's afraid? Wendy thought. But why? I don't understand. Why yes, Rei-sama. Asuka took a moment to gather her bearings. I just was wondering if you could help me. The others are bothering me. Bothering you? Rei cut in, hands moving to her hips and looming over Asuka like a dark shadow. My, what a shame. Asuka's hands clenched but she continued despite the growing ringing in her ears. They're bullying me, she said bluntly and to the point, wanting to end it as soon as possible. They keep calling me names, taunting me. They always mess with my things too, steal my food, and they try to hurt me sometimes. I keep telling them to stop but they won't. Please Rei-sama, if you could just have a word with the… Enough, she interrupted, her voice thunderous and eyes glinting with anger. Her lips were pulled into a sneer. Asuka's dread morphed into resignation and despair as she took a small step back. Rei-sama, I just… No, Rei hissed between clenched teeth. No, you don't get that privilege. You, my dear, are an abomination. You have the same eyes as that man. I don't care what the others say, you are and will always be just that, an abomination. She said, inching forward as Asuka stepped back. You don't get to complain. You don't deserve to. I've hated you the moment that you've stepped foot in this orphanage and I would give anything to be rid of you, but alas, she frowned, I cannot. Not now anyway. You will listen to me and listen well, girl. She pointed a sharp-nailed finger in Asuka's direction. I won't hear another word in my direction, not one, so long as you live under my roof. Am I clear? Asuka merely nodded shakily, but before she could do more, there was a burning sensation and she was thrown back with a cry. She placed a hand on her cheek, feeling the radiating heat as well as the rising bruise. She could hardly believe it. Rei showed no remorse, hands still hovering in the air. Yes, what? Yes, Rei-sama, Asuka answered hastily. Rei turned away from her and without a second look back said, get away from me. Asuka didn't hesitate to comply and she ran to her room that was solely occupied by herself. She closed the door behind her and it wasn't a moment later that tears began to run down her face. She hiccuped, her breath hitched, and then she was sobbing, shaking with the force of it. She hated the orphanage, hated it. She would have taken the illusion of Kate's shelter over this. Stop it, Wendy, she thought, trying to calm herself. Crying isn't going to solve anything. So what if there are a few bad apples? Not everyone is the same. Just get through this, just until you can go on your own. I'll get stronger, stronger than I've ever been before. She swore to herself, wiping the tears off herself. I'm better than this. She made a promise to herself that she wouldn't be weak, that she wouldn't let the hatred of others get her down. She couldn't let it. To do so would mean that they'd won and she was never going to stoop down as low as them either. That would have been just as bad. Since that day, she spent her time secluded. She stayed in her room, reading all that she could get her hands on. She began to strengthen herself by starting her training exercises. Asuka wanted to get strong as soon as possible, but she'd do so quietly. She didn't want anyone else to know. Not yet. Each day, starting from morning, she slowly went through katas and worked on her strength, stamina, and speed however she could. She dedicated hours to her practice. At first it was hard. There were days that she didn't want to continue, but she'd remember the promise that she'd made and the memory of her brothers and friends spurred her on. She had been a fairy tale mage, one of the greatest as well, and dragon slayer as well. There was no way she was going to let herself go. She wanted to get started on her magic as well, try and get a feel of it. Dragon Slayer magic tool, a lot of focus and dedication, and starting early would help. Asuka did so by meditating daily as well, and she did so for hours as well. What she had found, well, it had astounded her. She could feel her magic. It had the same familiar warmth of magic as ever, but it was different. No longer was she gaining magic externally, but it seemed that she was creating it. She'd barely just then noticed that it wasn't magic in the air that she'd been feeling but something else. A closer look and she'd noticed the differences. It was darker than her pale-colored sky dragon magic. Not to mention, she could feel that same sensation in her. And then she really sensed it. It was like a separate reservoir of magic, almost just as large. It was running through her like blood in her veins, and it was amazing. She spent weeks familiarizing herself with the two sources of power. It wasn't until later on that she had gained some information. Since she started her training, her stealth had increased and she regularly ghosted the hallways at night. She'd overheard a conversation held between some of the other orphans. Are you going to become a shinobi, Daisuke? Shinobi? Don't you need what's it called, chakra? Yeah, it's the mixing of spiritual and physical energies, or something like that at least. I mean, I kind of want to. You should. We can be the strongest shinobi ever. Hey, yeah? You're right, we can be the strongest and become Hokage. I think I'd have a better chance at that, Hideyoshi. There was a scoff. You know who doesn't have a chance? That blonde demon. Oh yeah, he keeps saying he's going to become Hokage. Like that's ever going to happen. And that girl too, that blue-haired one. I don't think she'd even graduate from the academy. There was the sound of laughter and Asuka left before she could hear more. It left her angry, but she'd taken a deep breath and calmed herself. They weren't worth it. Briefly, she'd wondered who was the blonde-haired demon that they were talking about. Still, later she'd thought about the words and she had been immensely relieved that she had managed to keep her magic. She would have been devastated if she didn't have it. The time seemed to pass on by quickly. She'd spent her 4th birthday alone and she'd idly wondered how everyone back home was doing. She'd finally found out that she wasn't in Earthland but in the elemental nations. It was a completely different world apparently, almost reminiscent to Daedalus, but the world wasn't linked to Earthland like Daedalus. That's what she assumed anyway. She doubted that there was a way to return. It would be for the best. She didn't know how much time had passed and her returning would just open old wounds. A little after her 5th birthday, October 11th, Ascua began leaving the orphanage. She was sure that the caretakers had noticed, but none of them made a move to stop her. She was both glad and saddened by the fact, but then her excitement at exploring overwhelmed her. The village was big. The orphanage was right in the middle of it, it seemed, surrounded by a little patch of land that served as a playground for the children. There were people walking up and down the street, dressed in a manner that reminded her of Hosenka. What was more, her eyes had immediately caught onto the people jumping and running atop rooftops with amazing agility and speed. No one even seemed to mind or notice, which suggested that it was normal. The different smells in the air enticed her, and the colors and the sheer difference of everything made her head spin. From the buildings to the people, the village of Konohagakure was starkly unlike anything she's ever seen. The mountain carved with the faces of those whom she assumed were important people was amazing as well. It was. Asuka didn't have words for it really. This is amazing, she'd thought, trying to take in everything that there was to see. But I need to find out more. Maybe at a library? But where would that be? Briefly Asuka wondered why no one even gave a glance so much her way. She'd thought that a little girl wandering alone would have attracted attention, but it seemed like that was not the case. As she took a glance around, however, she noticed the abundance of children that were running to and from places without a care. She'd guessed that maybe the village was secure enough to do so. Or maybe that was just normal as well? She'd stood in the middle of the road for a moment, unsure of what to do. Maybe I should ask someone? She'd murmured to herself. There were many people that were dressed similarly, wearing dark green vests, perhaps the uniform utilized? And Asuka assumed that perhaps they were the equivalent to mages. Maybe they're the shinobi that the others were talking about? Asuka kept walking, taking in the sights and sounds until she realized that she'd unconsciously followed a savory scent that led her to a stand that was partially obscured. Her mouth watered at the prospect of food, but she shook the thought away. She was on a mission, and regardless, she had no money to pay. Mournfully, she moved away from the stand. As she glanced around, she finally decided to ask someone for directions. She approached a man leaning against a wall who was talking to a friend. She stopped a few feet away from them and they noticed her soon enough. "Excuse me?" she said, hands clenched behind her back. "What can I do for you, little lady?" he said with a small smile. It made her want to smile because the man before her just proved her right. There were just as many good people as there were bad. Not everyone was like the cruel headmistress. "I was wondering if you could tell me where the library is, please?" she asked. The man raised an eyebrow, both at her question and manner of speaking. He didn't say anything though and merely nodded. "Ah, you'll want to go that direction," he pointed, "and then you go." He carefully explained the directions, repeating them once again to make sure that she got it. Asuka smiled and she bowed a bit to the other in gratefulness. "Thank you." The man laughed slightly. "It's no problem, kid." Asuka bowed once again and she turned, happily skipping down the road to the library and carefully following the directions given to her. She easily arrived to an impressive building and she took a moment to take it all in before she entered. There were people milling around, most of them wearing the green vest as well as the headband that depicted the symbol of the leaf, another characteristic she thought to be of what identified a shinobi. "Can I help you, miss?" a voice said. Asuka turned to find a young man, wearing both the headband and green vest. He had dark brown hair and kind gray eyes. Yes, Asuka answered. I was wondering if you can show me the history books? History? He said, taken aback. Why would you want to read about that? Asuka gave the man a smile. I find it interesting, Shinobi-san. The man waved a hand. None of that. The name's Soma. He turned and motioned for her to follow and lead her to a section. This section is open to the public. You have to be a shinobi and be a certain rank to get access to certain material though. Asuka nodded and gave Soma a bright smile. Thank you, Soma-san. The man nodded and he left. Make sure to put them back where you found them. Asuka placed her attention to the books and she noticed that there were also lines of scrolls. She was glad that she had studied the language as much as she did. She wouldn't have been able to understand much otherwise. The written language was different from the figures that Earthland used. Might as well get started. Asuka muttered to herself. And so she did. She grabbed piles and piles of books, each on varying topics. She read about the history of the Fire Nation, about the founding of Konoha, chakra, and even legends and stories that were found in the elemental nations. Chakra is the melding of spiritual and physical energies. It is the power that is used to fuel a variety of shinobi arts, more prominently in ninjutsu, genjutsu, and taijutsu. Chakra itself is neutral, but people gain certain affinities regarding ninjutsu. There are 5 elemental affinities: wind, water, earth, lightning, and fire. Chakra is regulated through the chakra pathway system, similar to the cardiovascular system. The more that Wendy read, the more she was amazed. Chakra sounded great, but she was curious to find out how magic would have competed against it. It seemed that chakra was more flexible than magic, seeing as mages usually learn one type, but still, she believed that magic wasn't to be underestimated. Some individuals have greater amounts of chakra. This may sound beneficial, but the key is to having efficient chakra control. By having a greater amount of chakra control, the wielder will be able to use it to its maximum potential and not waste it, regardless of the size of chakra reserves. People with large amounts of chakra have the tendency to have worse control. As such, it is important to practice as much as possible. Exercises such as meditation, water walking, tree walking, and the leaf concentration exercise, see page 80 to 100 for exercise details, will help in building chakra control. Her reading on chakra led to an entirely different branch of topics, but she resisted the urge. She needed to find out more about where she lived. Konohagakure, village hidden in the leaf, was founded by the Senju and Uchiha clans, specifically, Senju Hashirama and Uchiha Madara, whom used their positions as clan leaders to end the war between the two clans. Konoha is run by a leader called the Cage, and in the Hai no Kuni, called the Hokage, Fire Shadow. Each hidden village has a cage. Usually, they are the strongest shinobi in the village. Strength does not define a cage, however, and it is important that they show the ability to lead, care for the village itself, and show considerable skill such as tactics and more. Konoha also has a council, called the Konoha Go Ikeban, Tree Leaf Honored Opinion Watch. It advises the Hokage on decisions and important matters, but ultimately, the power lies with the Hokage. Usually, council members have decades worth of experience as well as knowledge. Shinobi are the main militant power in the elemental nation, majorly to hidden villages that also act on the daimyo's behalf. Most shinobi come from hidden villages. Whomever holds potential to become shinobi can, but it is also known that people from clans become shinobi easier due to the increased amount of resources available to them, such as training and information. Shinobi also have a sort of hierarchy in which they are ranked. Lower-level ninja defer to those of higher rank. Such ranking includes genin, junior ninja. They are the lowest-ranking shinobi. Usually, they do low-level missions, which is generally manual labor. There are occasions, however, when higher-level shinobi are unavailable that genin have to be sent due to necessity. This was mostly seen in the shinobi wars. Next is chunin, middle ninja. They are ninja that have achieved a level of maturity, as well as abilities that consist of leadership and tactical prowess. Chunin typically get sent on C and B ranked missions. They may also go on higher level missions, but they are led by a higher level shinobi such as Junin or even Anbo. Tokubetsu Jonin, special high ninja, are shinobi who specialize in a certain skill, rather than have all-around Jonin level abilities. Jonin, high ninja, are shinobi that have high experience and are highly skilled. They go on higher-level missions that typically involve a critical amount of danger, such as ARS rank missions. It is not unusual for a Jonin to go on missions alone, as they have the skills necessary to do so. Kage, Shadow, is a rank and title reserved for the leader of a hidden village. They oversee the village, have authority over all shinobi, and see to the safety of the people. They are usually also acknowledged as the village's strongest shinobi. Teams are also very important. In Konoha, teamwork is emphasized. Usually they are three-man cells led by a more experienced shinobi. Genin are put into these teams and are led by Jonin. Typically, when Genin achieve a higher rank the team is dissolved, but there are instances where a shinobi can apply for a partnership. A partnership between shinobi is permanent. With a partnership, the shinobi will get sent to missions with those that they created it with, only. A partnership is extremely rare, but usually are done by teams that display great bonds, teamwork, and skill. The more she read, the more Asuka was astounded. The ranking of missions was exactly the same as those in Earthland. Low-level missions were ranked as D and C, intermediate ranked B, and high-ranked missions A or S. She was sure that there were also sulfur monosulfide ranked missions, as well as that those ranks also applied to shinobi in terms of skill, power and danger. She read for a long time. It was interesting to her, but the more she read the more she saw the difference of culture and morals. She became aware one stark difference between Earthland and the elemental nations, and that was the fact they fought with the intent to kill. She could see the necessity though, as much as it troubled her. The elemental nations has gone through wars and struggles and hasn't truly known the peace that Fury has achieved. They are cloaked in shadows, waiting for the knife to strike at them. A shinobi must be prepared for blood to be spilt. There is no other way. They do so because how else will they protect their village? Their loved ones? It put a sour taste in her mouth, but Asuka resolved to investigate further until she properly formed an opinion. She didn't know the exact reasons after all, the things they went through, and the way that they lived. She could find out firsthand now though. She was reborn into this world and she was now a part of it. She closed the book with a sigh and moved on to other things. She explored the various legends as well as what little information there were of clans. Clans had reminded her of a family of mages that specialized in specific brand of magic. It was weird but fascinating at the same time. Her favorite legend that she read so far was that of the beginning of chakra, of the Rikudo Sennin, as well as that of the Princess of the Moon. It wasn't until later that she realized that hours had passed. She had hastily put away the books in their proper places. She didn't put them all away, however, as she walked to the front desk with arms laden with books. She had to place the books on the floor, however, as she was nowhere near tall enough to carry the books. Many shinobi glanced at her, most in amusement and curiosity, but they dismissed her not long after. "You checking those out, kid?" a voice said, and Asuka turned to find a shinobi behind her. Either Chunin or Jonin, she wasn't sure. But he had a kind look in his eye and Asuka sensed nor smelled any ill intent from the dirty blonde-haired shinobi. "Yes, shinobi-san," she said, a smile forming on her lips as she pulled her blue hair away from her face. "Masaru?" a voice said, and both turned to see Soma walking their way. "Hey Soma, still stuck in the library, huh?" Masaru smirked, an amused glint in his light blue eyes. "I thought you would have moved on to something better, Soma." Soma rolled his eyes. "I like working here, Masaru. Kami, the kid has more sense than you do," he muttered as he leant down to pick up the books that were on the floor. Legend of the Moon, Traveler of the Sky, Elemental Nations and its Hidden Villages, and Chakra and You. "You planning on becoming a shinobi, kid?" Asuka glanced at the man, hands twisting nervously together. "Maybe, I am not sure yet. That's why I came to the library, to see if I could decide." Masaru raised an eyebrow as he leant down and swooped the tiny girl. "Really? She's the smallest thing he's ever seen up," disregarding her squeak of surprise and placing her gently atop the desk. "Don't be on a rush, kid. Being a shinobi is serious business." Asuka stared at him with wide golden eyes. "Why did you become a shinobi then, Masaru-san? Could you tell me?" She waved a hand wildly. "I mean, you don't have to answer." Masaru and Soma exchanged a glance of surprise. A smile formed on Masaru's face. "Ah, that's simple. I did it because I wanted to protect my family and friends, as well as the village. But I think this book will help you somewhat." He handed her a book from his own stack. Asuka takes it curiously. "The Will of Fire?" Soma agave a huff of laughter, crossing his arms across his chest. It's what the village believes in, the majority of shinobi anyway. It's the idea that the key to peace is love. Basically, the entire village is like a family and every shinobi with the will of fire loves, cherishes, believes and fights to protect the village. It's sort of symbolic of the hopes and dreams of the previous generation that are passed on to the next. You get me? It just occurred then that a kid might not be able to understand a word that he said. Children don't tend to think so deeply until later on, but something told him that she'd understand. Asuka's eyes brightened. Was this the answer that she was looking for? Would this help her? Yes. Thank you, Soma-san. Soma smiled, this time something more genuine and soft. And would you look at that? She has more manners than you do, Masaru. He walked behind the desk and gathered up the books, beginning the process of checking them out for the little girl. Masaru rubbed the girl's hair good-naturedly with a mutter of, "Brat." Soma handed them to Asuka, who took them with a bit of a struggle. They were a heavy for her, something that galled her slightly, but she knew it was just something that she'd have to fix with more training. She needed something more intensive. "Here you go, kid. You're a smart cookie. I'm sure I don't need to tell you to return them when you're done, right?" Asuka shook her head. "Of course not, Soma-san. I'll return them. You need help carrying them, kid?" Masaru asked as he handed his own books over to check out. Poisons and You was written in bright cheery letters. Kami, shinobi were weird lot. Asuka hesitated, but she knew that she'd struggle carrying them on her own. She was a long way from the orphanage and she didn't want to damage the books by dropping them. At the same time, however, she didn't really want Masaru to see where she lived, to see the hatred in their eyes, and decided that he hated her now too. "Don't think like that, Wendy," she thought. "That's illogical. You don't know him well enough to think that." Okay, Masaru-san. Thank you. Give him a chance when Asuka. "No problem, kid." Masaru took the books in hand, his as well as Asuka's, and promptly lifted Asuka to his shoulders with a grin as he listened to her sound of surprise. "Come on then, kid. Just tell me where you live and we'll get there in no time." "See ya later, Soma." Soma gave a laugh as he waved his goodbye. "Don't drop the kid, Masaru." "Let's go then." Masaru nodded. "Make sure to hold on tight, okay? Don't want you falling." Tiny hands promptly gripped at his blonde hair, gently but firmly. "Where do you live, kid?" "Wait, tell me your name. I can't keep calling you kid." My name is Asuka, Masaru-san." Wendy answered, and she looked up curiously as she sensed someone approaching. "What the fuck?" Masaru frowned. "Watch your language around the kid, Aoba." "Did you kidnap her?" Aoba asked. He had dark-colored hair, wore his headband slightly slanted, had standard green vest, and dark sunglasses that obscured his eyes. "What?" Masaru said incredulously. "Of course not. I'm just helping her get home." "Did she get lost?" "No, Aoba." Masaru sighed and Asuka gave a giggle, noticing the long-suffering tone that she's heard dozens times before. "Anyway, what was your name, kid?" "Asuka," she answered. "I live in Rei-sama's orphanage." Masaru's step faltered slightly and Asuka waited for his response. She was immensely relieved a moment later at his answer. Masaru muttered. "Okay, then I'll get you there in no time, Asuka-chan." He turned to his other companion. "You can come with or get lost, Aoba. I don't really care either way." He bounded off with a leap of chakra to the rooftops, smiling slightly at Asuka's joyous laughter. "Why are you so mean, Masa-chan?" Aoba cried, quickly dodging the kunai thrown his way. "Ass," Masaru muttered. "Jerk," Aoba replied, a smirk tugging on his face as he followed close behind. True to Masaru's word, they arrived quickly. As Asuka stared at the tall gated orphanage, it seemed to loom over her. It almost intimidated her, but the knowledge that there was good to be found in this world comforted her. She knew that she'd struggle, that was a given, but Asuka would overcome any and all obstacles that came her way. She'd become strong, so much so that she'd be known just as she had been in Earthland and like her brothers. She'd make them proud and make friends of her own that she'd be glad to call family, just like Fairy Tale. Masaru gently put Asuka down. "Here you go, Asuka-chan. You be careful, okay?" he said as out of the corner of his eye he saw the head caretaker, Rei, bounding down the steps and towards them with a smile on her face. Masaru pasted a smile on his face, one that didn't reach his eyes as he greeted the woman. Good afternoon, Rei-san." Aoba tensed slightly behind him but relaxed a moment later, slouching in an easygoing way. "Shinobi-san, how can I help you?" she said, her tone carefully neutral, and she glanced towards Asuka with a stern look. "Was she bothering you? I must apologize then. I can assure you that Asuka-chan will be appropriately punished then," she said hurriedly, hands placed on her hips. Masaru shook his head. "That won't be necessary, Rei-san. Asuka-chan was very well behaved. I merely gave her some assistance in coming home." Masaru smiled tersely at the woman and leaned down to be at eye level with Asuka. "I'll see you later, okay, Asuka-chan?" he said. Asuka nodded, eyebrows furrowed as she glanced between the three adults. "Yes, Masaru-san, it was a pleasure meeting you. You as well, Aoba-san," she said. Aoba smiled. "Something tells me this won't be the last time I see you squirt. You take care in the meantime, okay?" Asuka nodded as she retreated behind the gates, Rei waiting with a plastic smile on her face. "Goodbye," she said happily, not even caring for Rei's presence. They waved back before they disappeared in a show of speed. Asuka hurriedly went into the orphanage, Rei following behind her in a more sedate pace. She went straight to her room and slammed the door closed. She placed her books gently into a little hiding spot that she'd found under the floorboards that was filled with other possessions. She heard the sounds of approaching footsteps and placed back the floorboards just in time for the door to slam back open with great force, so much so that the door bounced back and the sound caused Asuka to flinch in surprise, despite having heard her. "You," Rei hissed, hair askew from its usual neat bun. "You brought those shinobi to my doorstep? What did you do to them, vermin?" Rei walked forward and as fast as a viper, locked her hand around Asuka's throat. She lifted her up as if she weighed nothing and ignored her desperate gasps of pain and panic. "Oh, I just know this will be the last time that I can put my hands on you, you brat, thanks to that little adventure you had there, but mark my words. There are other ways to keep you in check," she said ever so softly, disregarding the hand that was clawing at her own. After a few moments, which seemed to last for an eternity to Asuka, Rei threw her down to the floor harshly. Asuka took in desperate gulps of air, tasting foul to her tongue in that moment. She laid a shaking hand to her throat and despite her shock, she looked up towards Rei. Asuka didn't cry. She calmed her breathing and she stood despite the burning in her throat. She glared at the headmistress. "Get out," she rasped, her throat hurting with each word but she ignored it. "What did you say?" Rei replied, moving a hand up in the air as if to strike her. "Get out," Asuka repeated, moving forward and glaring with anger towards the woman. She clenched her hands at her sides, fury coursing through her veins. To think that this woman was in charge of children was preposterous. Or maybe the woman was capable of taking care of children. It was just her that she had a problem with. And for the life of her, Asuka couldn't recall what it was that she did to anger the woman. It was unfair and she hated because she wasn't one to keep grudges, but this, it tested her, immensely. Rei's eyes narrowed and she made to strike her but Asuka was faster. Asuka held Rei's hand in her grip, tightening ever so slowly to painful proportions. "I said get out," she yelled, pushing her away, so much so she went out the door and hit the hallway door with a thump. "Don't come in here. Don't bother me. Don't even so much as look at me, woman, because you will regret it." Asuka hissed, chakra and magic alike spiking and making the airfield choking and heavier. Rei stared at her with wide eyes, uncomprehending. "Am I clear?" Asuka threw back Rei's words, repeating each with a dark promise. Rei saw a demon before her, with eyes that glowed brightly and bore into her soul. She saw the image of eyes staring at her from the shadows, a towering form that loomed over her, and ferocious growls that echoed in her ears. She swallowed heavily, sweat forming on her forehead, and the fear in the back of her throat tasted bitter. She shook her head in acknowledgement before standing up shakily and hurriedly leaving without a look back. Asuka closed the door with a solid click, turning and leaning on it a moment later. She closed her eyes tightly and she took a deep breath. She was changing just by living in this world, and she knew that there would be times where she couldn't be the kind person that she knew she was. That, or maybe Gajeel and Laxus rubbed had instilled their tempers in her. Still, she understood that this world wasn't as kind as hers. It was necessary to adapt, and she knew that her brothers wouldn't have begrudged her for it. If they had been with her, she knew that they would change as well. They'd do anything that was necessary to keep each other safe and damn those that stood in their way and what they protected. They were dragons given human form. They held slitted eyes, fangs capable of tearing flesh as well as claws, could draw powerful breaths, could eat the element themselves, held immense strength that could shatter the earth, held a ridiculous amount of stamina that would let them fight on where others would have fallen, and even held skin that was nigh impenetrable and could be covered in scales that was even more powerful. "Forget about it, Wendy," she murmured to herself, hands flexing slightly and the sharp end of her claws briefly skimming across her skin. "You have more important things to be concerned about." She moved to the center of the room and she sat down. She breathed slowly and evenly, concentrating on the feel of her chakra and magic. She said lowly, I need to get stronger. She felt her magic, so familiar and comforting. Her chakra pulsed like a steady heartbeat, unique to her in its difference. To be faster. To endure. The air seemed to shift around her, picking up stray dust. A ring of wind began to swirl around her sitting form, small and ever-shifting. For my loved ones. For her brothers. For Fairy Tale. For her future friends and comrades. For her new home. Her two power sources were separated, but Wendy was sure that if she wanted to, she might be able to mix them. Before that, however, she needed more information. For now, she'd try to get to know her chakra. It was bizarre to have two sources of power but incredibly helpful. She knew that with this, she'd reach new heights. She was going to become one of the most powerful shinobi in the world, no matter what. It was her dream, to be acknowledged as strong and someone worthy of respect. That night led the start of her training, very intensive training. She had a regimen of daily exercise that she conducted in her room. It was designed to build up her muscle mass, strengthen her muscles including her core, as well as begin to increase her stamina. She also wanted to build up her speed, and she did so by running in the forest, out of sight from inquiring eyes, including shinobi. She wanted to do more, but at the moment she was limited. When she enrolled in the academy, Asuka would be sure to buy weights. It would be very useful and beneficial as they would help increase speed, stamina, strength and endurance. Not to mention, it had the added bonus of being very discreet. She was also implementing the chakra exercises that she had read about. At first, it was hard, but Asuka was nothing but determined. The first time she did the leaf concentration exercise, she failed. Spectacularly. The leaf in her hand had, bluntly, been ripped to shreds. She had stared confused at the pieces before trying again with another leaf. She tried to put less of her chakra, which was a bit hard. Her chakra felt like a waterfall that was trying to be funneled through a small point, but she applied her own magic control methods, and found it a bit easier. It would still be necessary to put a massive amount of practice, but Asuka was certainly willing to put the effort. This time, the leaf stuck to her face but quivered weakly on her face. She tried to use less chakra and it stuck more, but even then, it was tentative. Many tries later, the leaf stuck to her firmly. Still, she wanted nothing but sharp precision, so she stuck multiple leaves all over her bodies. She understood that generally, only a small portion of shinobi used all of the tenketsu, and she wanted to be a part of that. She tried meditating throughout the process, trying to practice her control unconsciously so it would become second instinct, almost akin to the automatic regulating of chakra when a shinobi mastered water walking and tree walking. That was what she did as well. She practiced in her own room, uninterrupted. She had sent the minimal amount of chakra in her feet, preferring to slip than to unintentionally destroy her room. It was easier to do than the leaf exercise, she found, but she didn't let her success get to her. Water walking took a lot of effort. She had gone into the woods, which, she found, was very peculiar. The plant life was tall and there was a ridiculous amount of deadly fauna. The few animals that she encountered were unusually big and ferocious, smelling like the scent of blood. She had sensed the peculiar energy that strongly permeated the forest, and a brief thought brought the image of the Shodan. It made sense then. The first Hokage must have made the forest with his Mokuton, and the chakra that was left behind increased the vitality and strength of those that dwelled within it. She found a river once she wandered inwards, and she had taken a brief moment to appreciate the sight. The air tasted wonderful and beauty of nature astounded her. The trees in Konoha were so tall and green, towering over those of Earthland as well as others in the elemental nations, she was sure. She had walked towards the river, expecting to get dropped into the cold waters more than once. She had sent chakra into her feet in an even thin film before placing a foot on the surface of the water. She knew that the ability to walk on water and on surfaces was common and a necessity, but it still amazed her. Asuka has never seen anything like it in Earthland. The resistance that she was met with surprised her, and she had tentatively placed the other feet in. She let out a breath of relief and took a few unsteady steps. Not a moment later, she plunged into the river with a shriek. Asuka easily resurfaced a moment later with a sigh. She went back to the river bank and tried again, and again, and again. She increased her duration each time, but she also went through different motions to get used to the idea of fighting atop of water. It was hard, especially considering that the flow of water was inconsistent and she had to regulate the amount of chakra accordingly. If she could master her chakra control in her feet, which was the most difficult, then everything else would be easy. It wasn't until later that she found out that she was in the forest of death. She didn't really care, however. In fact, her visits increased. Asuka figured that if she could survive the treachery of the forest of death, then she could take on anything the academy threw towards her, at least until she could find something more challenging. Each day was the same. She was ignored by the inhabitants of the orphanage, though they still whispered behind her back and gave her looks of fear and disgust. She was left to fend for herself, which she could do, but it still troubled her somewhat that Ray would allow a child, despite how unusual as she was, be left to their fate. She went through her daily regimen of exercises, which increased her flexibility, agility, strength, stamina, speed, and endurance. She also tried to visit the library at least once a week. Each time, Soma greeted her with a smile and an amused look in his eyes. He helped her with whatever she needed, never once asking questions regardless of what book she'd check out, which ranged from fairy tales, legends, to chakra and nature transformation, and even introductory medical texts. Sometimes, she even encountered Masaru. Another weird combination? Soma remarked as he eyed her selection. Asuka pouted. It's not weird. They're interesting. Legends of the past. A voice read, and Asuka looked behind to see Masaru staring down at her with a puzzled look. Another shinobi wasn't far behind, this one someone she didn't recognize. She'd long memorized the names of those that she commonly saw on her way to the library, like the shopkeepers and stall owners that she passed as well. The founding clans? Uzushio, Konoha's sister village. The tale of forest spirits. He read, increasingly incredulous. What the hell? With each title read, Asuka's face got increasingly red before she frowned. Don't judge me, Masaru-san. They're interesting to me, she said. Soma laughed lowly. Leave her alone, Masaru. At least she reads for fun and doesn't treat it like the worst chore in the world, which is more than I can say for you. He mocked, smirking at the offended face Masaru threw at him. Shut up, Soma, he said before turning back towards Asuka. Why do you have so many books anyway? Don't you go out and play or something? He asked. Asuka fidgeted, looking away from their gaze. I spend a lot of time alone, Masaru-san. The other kids don't like me much, but I don't mind, she said truthfully. She didn't want friends that judged others by the words of others, that didn't follow their own opinions and held such unwarranted hatred in their hearts. Besides, I got the books to occupy me for my birthday. Soma and Masaru both stared at her blankly, trying to register the words in their minds. Yeah, no, Masaru said, throwing Asuka's books into his bag without a care. He hefted Asuka up to his shoulders without a word, ignoring her yelp of surprise. He turned and began to walk out the library. Let's go, Soma. Leave the desk, he said, his voice leaving no room argument. The encouragement wasn't needed as Soma was already following closely behind. Take over for me, Ayaka. Thanks. He didn't pay attention to the sputtered replies nor the sounds of confusion. He casually meandered near Masaru, who had placed Asuka over his shoulders. The two men exchanged glances, nodding a moment later. Akamichi? Akamichi. Let's go, Kyo-chan, Masaru said as he leapt towards the rooftop. Masaru-san, Asuka said, hands gripping at Masaru even as a smile formed on her face. They went from rooftop to rooftop until they arrived to their destination. A sign read Akamichi, but Asuka was mostly focused on the intense savory scents that came from the restaurant. Her mouth watered and her stomach gurgled with hunger. She's never smelled anything so good in her life. She shook the thought away. What are we doing here, Masaru-san? She asked. Masaru gave a small huff of laughter. It's your birthday, right, kid? He said as he walked in. Like hell are you spending your it alone? Soma nodded as they sat down in a spare booth. I can't believe the other brats don't like you. You're a smart brat. Masaru placed Asuka next to him, gently and absently patting her head. So cute, Tilda, he thought. They're just jealous. Don't listen to them, Asuka-chan. He said. Have you decided if you wanted to join the academy? He asked curiously. Soma turned his attention to the blue-haired little girl. He saw her regularly, at least once a week, and somehow, during that time, Asuka endeared herself to him. Damn his soft heart, but he couldn't say no to her. Since the first time they met, Soma had been curious about her. She had been so small when they'd met, so fragile that Soma was half afraid she'd be blown away with a gust of the wind, but there was a determination and strength in her gaze that had stopped him, that had made him wonder. She was smart too, and damn if she wasn't a budding genius. He knew that he'd do anything to protect her, and by the look in Masaru's eyes, he would too. Asuka tore her gaze away from the menu and blinked. Ah, that, she murmured. Yes, I've decided to enroll in the academy once I turn 8. She answered, a small smile forming on her face. I joined because I wanted to become stronger, for many reasons, and I figured that I could start with the academy. I figured, Soma said, a smile on his face as well. He reached into his own pocket and took out a scroll. He placed it atop the table, unrolling it and revealing a sealing array. Asuka looked on curiously, wondering what he was doing when she spied Masaru doing the same and unrolling his own scroll. A sealing scroll? She wondered. Simultaneously, they placed their hands atop the array. There was a small cloud of smoke before it dissipated. A small pile of books was revealed, as well as what looked like a pouch, akin to those that shinobi commonly wore, as well as a box. Happy birthday then, Asuka-chan. Soma said, pushing the pile of books towards Asuka. Masaru did the same with the pouch and box. Happy birthday, he said cheerfully. Asuka stared comprehensively, but before she knew it, tears were brimming in her eyes. She gave a watery smile. She had been fully prepared to spend her birthday alone, but it seemed like fate had other plans. Asuka stuttered, tears winding down her face. Thank you so much, she said, standing in the booth and giving Masaru a tight hug before leaping across the table and doing the same to Soma. The two shinobi smiled in satisfaction and contentment. We're at Akamichi's, kid, order whatever you want. Everything's good, Masaru said. They stayed there for a long time. They ate the most delicious food that Asuka has ever tasted, and they were waited on by the kindest waiter that she's ever met. She figured that they were the famously talented cooks, the Akamichi. The trio talked and talked about anything and everything. They laughed, they had fun, and Asuka knew that they were the first of her precious people. She knew that she'd help them in any way that she could. They left a few hours later. Soma and Masaru personally escorted her home and left with heartfelt goodbyes, reminding her to not let the words and actions of others get to her. Remember, Soma said, leaning down to be at eye level with Asuka, they don't matter, Asuka-chan. You just worry about yourself, you hear? He said. Su-chan's right, Masaru said, disregarding the other's glare. Besides, none of those brats have half the talent that you have. I know that you're going to be one hell of a shinobi, kid. He gave Asuka a smile. Asuka gave both a heartfelt smile. Thank you, she said, voice brimming with emotion. Thank you so much. For the week afterwards, Asuka was so happy that she completely forgot about the gross behavior of the other inhabitants in orphanage. She had been surprised at the gifts that she had been given, but they had been incredibly useful. Soma had given her books on chakra control, nature transformation and elements, introductory as well as slightly advanced medical texts, as well as surprisingly fuinjutsu. The books helped immensely. It had given her tips that she found, while simple, were incredibly useful. Her chakra control skyrocketed and she could water walk and tree walk without a thought now. She read about the different affinities that a shinobi could have, and she already found out what they were. Wedged in between the pages of the book was the paper that allowed one to see their affinity. Asuka had carefully fed her chakra to the paper and had been immensely surprised when it wrinkled and then became damp. She had been expecting the paper to split in two, but when she thought about it, it made sense. Her chakra was independent of her magic, her Sky Dragon Slayer magic, so it wasn't unusual that her affinity was water and lightning. Masaru had given her a set of kunai and shuriken as well as a holster colored black. She hadn't wasted any time to begin practicing with them. The first few times had been hard, but she had seen enough shinobi with them to have some semblance of an idea on how to utilize them. If she had learned anything from Urza though, was to treat any weapon as an extension of yourself. Training with weapons had given Asuka the idea of perhaps trying to specialize with one, but with what weapon, she was still unsure. She needed to research more, as well as to try to find a taijutsu style that would work with her dragon-slaying magic. Regarding the medical texts, she had read it through thoroughly first. She took healing seriously and she could see that what she was studying was a lot more in-depth. It was complicated, a bit daunting, especially considering that she may have someone else's life in the palm of her hands, but it wasn't something she was willing to pass by. If it would help her loved ones, then she would definitely do her best to perfect it. There weren't any techniques in the book, but that was fine. There was more to learn first. It was only a matter of time, and then she'd begin. Her marks had been slightly off, and each time she had thrown either a kunai or shuriken, they hit slightly off-center. She was close, but it would take her more practice. She developed calluses and she had gained a few cuts and scrapes from handling weapons, but they healed easily enough. The most significant thing that happened, however, was when she moved out of the orphanage. Rei had heeded her word and kept her distance, but it seemed that she wouldn't let her anger fade as long as she resided there. She found other ways to make her life hell. There was never enough food left over for Asuka, as it seemed that she always missed breakfast, dinner, and lunch by a margin. The pantries were also empty each time she checked, and she checked even during odd hours. Asuka was forced to go hungry more than a few times. Asuka had to go find other means for food, some which involved hunting in the forest of death. There was never any hot water left over for her, was never given decent clothes, could never find shoes that fit her. It was one thing after another, and Asuka finally decided that enough was enough. Asuka had donned the best clothing that she had and went into the Hokage tower. She had politely requested to see the Hokage. The secretary had looked at her incredulously, and she was sure that she would have been turned down, if it hadn't been for a very familiar shinobi passing by. "Hey, you're that kid that always Masaru and Kenta are always around," Aoba said, pointing a rude finger towards Asuka. Not far behind were other two shinobi. One held a scarred face and was looking towards Asuka curiously. Another was a woman. She had long black hair and deep red eyes, reminding Asuka of the famed Uchiha clan that she had heard and read about. They were missing the kamas that the Uchiha held, but Asuka decided that both the woman's and the Sharingans were hauntingly beautiful. "Ah, Aoba-san," Asuka greeted, eyes wide in surprise. "What are you doing here?" he said, lowering his hand when the woman pushed it down. "I needed to talk to Hokage-sama," Asuka answered. "I wanted to talk to him about a personal matter," she said, slightly hesitating. She wasn't sure if she wanted anyone else to know about her unusual situation. She was slightly afraid to see how others would react, but she knew that she'd moved past it. It was best to forget that it ever happened. Besides, that would give power to Rei's actions, give her the satisfaction of seeing her affected, and there was no way that Asuka would allow that. "Right," Aoba said, rubbing at the back of his head. "Right. This is my friend, Yuhi Kurenai." "Kurenai, Asuka-chan." Kurenai smiled at the little girl slightly. "It's nice to meet you, Asuka-chan." Asuka smiled, nodding. "Likewise," she said. She rubbed at the floor with a foot before a determined look filtered over her face. "Anyo, would you two be able to help me?" Aoba and Kurenai exchanged a glance. A few moments later, Asuka was standing before the most powerful man in the village. The Sandaime Hokage was an elderly man that had a kind demeanor, but it didn't hide the strength and keen intelligence in the man's eyes, nor the aura of strength that he imposed. His warm brown eyes were staring right at her. He reminded her very much of Master Makarov. A man like him, she knew, was worthy of respect, if only just because he was the Hokage. "Hokage-sama," she greeted, bowing to the leader of Konoha. "Ah." The Hokage placed his hands atop the desk. "You are Asuka-chan, yes? My shinobi tell me you wanted to speak to me." Asuka nodded, eyes trained on the floor. "Yes, I know that you must be busy, being the Hokage, so I will try not to take too much of your time." The Hokage laughed lowly. "Nonsense, child. I could use a distraction every now and then." He stared at the multiple piles of paperwork. "The paperwork always seems to breed," he muttered before turning his attention back to the little girl. She was small, a little slip of a thing with long dark blue hair and eyes that brought a pang of regret. Her eyes reminded him those of his own student, but Asuka's were different. They were darker, more golden than yellow. He shook the thought away. "How can I help you, child?" Asuka smiled, sensing the genuine intent in the man. Aye, she took a deep breath, taking a moment to compose herself. I wanted to ask if I could be granted my own home. As well as a stipend, at least until I enroll in the academy and become a shinobi. Sarutobi frowned. You wish to have a home? Asuka nodded, eyes lowering somewhat. Yes, I live in the orphanage you see. She didn't miss the slight reaction that he gave. However, I know that my chances of getting adopted are slim. My presence in the orphanage seems to cause discontent. Sarutobi's eyes narrowed, his frown becoming heavy. He's heard that before, in a child just as young as Asuka, except he held golden hair and the brightest blue eyes. Discontent could mean a lot of things, could imply a lot of things that he hoped weren't true. It would solve a lot of problems if I lived on my own, Hokage-sama. I would bother no one, Hokage-sama. She finished. There was silence in the office for a moment. What kind of discontent, Asuka-chan? He said, voice stern. I'd appreciate it if you would spare me no details. Asuka said nothing for a moment. She was before the Hokage, the being that commanded the entire military power of Konoha. She didn't think that she could deny him, but at the same time, she felt that she could trust the man. Her instinct told her she could, and Asuka wasn't the type to ignore them. So she did. She explained the hateful behavior of the inhabitants of the orphanage, especially Rei's. She told of her experience and time there. Told of him, of the shoebox room, her clothing that was little more than rags, of the sparse food that was left for her, the cold that permeated, and so much more. She told him of the unwarranted anger, the bullying. Everything. It didn't seem like much, but Asuka was sure that had she mentally been as old as she looked, if she had been nothing but a little girl, this could have been really devastating. Sarutobi remained silent after she finished. He had his eyes closed and his hands were interlocked before him. He breathed in and out calmly and looked ever composed. He opened his eyes a moment later. Granted, ever since she left the orphanage, Asuka was as happy as she could be. The apartment that she had been granted was small and quaint, located in the top floor that had surprisingly few residents and had a balcony as well. Nothing really impressive, but it was hers. That was all that really mattered. What little she owned was easily moved. She was also afforded a stipend that covered her rent as well as other necessary expenses, as well as a bit extra. She smiled when she remembered why she was given more money, straight out of the Hokage's own. But why, Hokage-sama? She said, shocked. I need nothing more than to cover the necessary expenses. The Hokage shook his head, a small smile on his lips. I have no doubt that you can manage your money well, Asuka-chan. You're very mature for your age, but still, you are a child. You should afford at least a few pleasures. Besides, he said, eyes warm and tone fond. You remind me a bit of another child that I know. Maybe you'll meet him one day. He wondered aloud. Asuka smiled. I can't thank you enough, Oji-sama. She said, and then a blush burned hotly on her face. I mean, Hokage-sama. The Hokage laughed loudly. It is fine, Asuka-chan. I don't mind. She reminds me more and more of him with every encounter. I can only hope that she does meet him. They would certainly benefit from each other. On another hand, I must have a word with the orphanage. It's no coincidence that they both lived there. His eyes narrowed sharply, but he made a mental note, choosing instead to pay attention to the girl before him. She was like kindness given form. He could see it, but there was also a determination that burned bright in her eyes. It gave him hope. If I may, Hokage-sama, she started, could we keep this between us? I don't want. She trailed off, trying to put her thoughts into words. Sarutobi nodded and said, I understand. When she first moved, the first thing that Asuka had done was budget her expenses. She calculated the amount of money that she would spend on things such as rent, food, clothes, weapons, and so on. She was lucky that the apartment had already came with the necessary furniture such as a small table, a couch, a bed, a wardrobe, a small coffee table, and most surprising of all, a bookcase. There wasn't any kitchenware unfortunately, but it shouldn't cost much seeing as she only needed a few dishes and pots and pans. She'd buy more later, especially since she really enjoyed cooking. When she was done, she began her little shopping spree. She made sure to spend only on what was absolutely necessary. She had planned to spend money on herself later on, at least until she really settled in. She bought bedding, a few pieces of kitchen necessities, hygiene products such as shampoo, conditioner and other toiletries, as well as a few towels, and she also spent a good portion of her money on food, and most of all, a basic medical kit that she planned to gradually add on to. She went home, arms bulging with various bags, and secretly, she enjoyed the incredulous stares that she garnered from civilians. The bags that she carried looked heavy, but her training paid off. They hardly weighed anything, not to mention that the attributes that Dragon Slayer magic gave were kicking in, although a little later than in Earthland. Her teeth were sharpening and her fangs were becoming prominent. Soon they'd be strong enough to even break steel. Her nails were pointed and strengthening, sharp enough to gauge the earth. Flesh was easier, that she was sure. She was strong enough to punch small craters in the earth now and tear apart small trees. Her senses were as keen as they had previously been, with a sharp sense of smell, eyesight that could see clear into the night, and more, as well as hearing and even taste. She was becoming as she was in Earthland, even though she had been reborn into this new world, but she was grateful. Her dragon attributes would no doubt be useful in this world. It made her wonder if she'd be able to eat the elements here as well. She had no doubt about wind, but there was a question about how eating chakra would affect her. Ninjutsu was made up of chakra after all, but she had a feeling that it wouldn't cause a negative reaction in her, at least, nothing as drastic like when Natsu ate a Thernano. Another thing that she wasn't sure of was if her immunity to poisons transferred over. She'd have to test it later. It seemed that things were looking up for Asuka. She had her own home, was away from her tormentors, had a steady income, and she was set to get enrolled in the next year to the academy. She had increased the difficulty of her daily regimen, had increased her weights, now weighing a total of 100 pounds, 45 kilogram, had increased her chakra control to the point that she could stick small rocks and leaves all around her body, and was increasing her knowledge by the day. Life seemed good, except the only thing that was missing were friends her age that she could call her own. She could only hope to make some in the academy, and if there was a repeat of the orphanage, well, as they said, there was more than one fish in the sea. There was bound to be someone. Currently, Asuka was on her way to the Forest of Death. It had become her retreat, a little home away from home. It was unusual, especially considering the hazards that the forest bore, but to Asuka's it only served to capture her attention even more. It also helped that the saturation of chakra would help mask her activities. There were big wild felines capable of tearing a man to shreds and wolves that could easily tear the flesh from bone. The plants were largely venomous, and grew to proportions that Asuka knew was unusual. There were medicinal plants as well, which she took harvested when she was able to. They were extremely potent and more effective than those that grew out of the forest. Why they weren't used, Asuka didn't know, but that only meant that there was more for her. She was planning on starting on ninjutsu. For taijutsu, she had her old fighting style to back on, at least until she found something else to incorporate. She had no idea how she'd do in genjutsu. If she used illusions, she was sure to use the image of the worst enemies she and Fairy Tail had faced. No doubt that Acnologia would strike fear in even the hardest of hearts. She was in the same river that she had frequented for her water exercise. She knew she couldn't use low-level jutsu. They would just fall apart, but she knew that there were also some essential techniques that she had to learn, such as kawarimi, substitution technique. It would be best to start at semi-advanced techniques and go up from there. She had two basic techniques that she wanted to try, each for her elemental affinity. She was also planning on mastering techniques from other elements as well, but she knew that they'd be a great deal harder, so she'd focus on lightning and water for now. They required hand seals, as all jutsu did. The use of hand seals in this world had baffled her, but she then started to comprehend their importance. It was hard at first, trying to remember them all as well as their meaning and uses. It was even more troublesome trying to move her hands into the motions, trying to do the seals correctly. It was a bit of chore to remember to do them when it was instinctive to use seal-less magic. Still, practice makes perfect. She was decent at it now, but she wanted to get to the point where she could reduce the number of seals in a technique. She wasn't quite sure if it was possible to do jutsu without at least one seal. It would require research. She was going to try Sweden, Mizurapa, water style, raging waves, in which the user expelled a waterfall of water from their mouth. As for lightning, all she'll try to do for now is channel it through her weapon. It reminds me of Urza's Lightning Empress armor. That reminds me, I need to read as much as I can about tactics and such. In Earthland, mages usually faced each other head-on, but here, it's a lot more complex. They incorporate a great deal of tactics and stealth, that's for sure. Asuka gave a sigh before trying her luck. She needed her chakra, focusing on her intent and the feeling of it. It felt cool, almost soothing, but it occasionally changed into something more charged and searing, almost reminiscent of the way Laxus's own magic felt. She gripped her kunai with a hand, focused her chakra to travel down her arm. There was the sound almost akin to glass breaking, a cracking and sharp snapping sound. Asuka opened her eyes, briefly wondering when she had closed them, but the thought was discarded swiftly as shock and elation filled her. White energy surrounded the kunai, shifting and cracking, but it didn't hurt her even when sparks hit her skin. Asuka smiled before a serious look crossed her face. She charged determinedly towards a tree, leaving no sign of her steps behind her, and it took little time to cross the clearing. She gave a war cry before slicing at the tree, and she was surprised when she was met with nearly no resistance. It was like slicing butter with a hot knife. She leaned back to survey her damage, and she marveled at the deep, clean gauge that she left behind. Curiously, she stemmed the flow of chakra and lifted the kunai and sliced at the tree again. This time, she was met with more resistance and had to put more strength behind the attack. It wasn't a clean cut either. You can amplify your weapons with chakra? Asuka observed, and even with different elements. Lightning amplifies the piercing power. I can only imagine what wind could do, or the others. She mused. She'd probably do a little experimenting later on. She repeated the technique over and over again. It had been more than a few hours, that she was sure, but her reserves were nowhere near depleted. A while later, she began on her the water jutsu. She was a little apprehensive about trying the technique out, but she would get nowhere if she let her apprehension control her. Determinedly, Asuka began to gather chakra, kneading, transforming it. The technique was almost like that of a dragon roar that the slayers used. Asuka used those principles to also help her. She tuned out the world for a moment, closing her eyes, before she leaned back in a motion similar to when she prepared to use her Tenryu no Hoko, Sky Dragon's roar. Then, her eyes snapped open and she released the buildup of chakra. A torrent of water rushed forward, although it was more of a stream than the waterfall that it was supposed to be. Asuka frowned. That's not right, she muttered, again. She said to herself as she took a deep breath and gathered chakra once again. This time, she gathered a larger amount and repeated the process. Now, Wendy thought, and then, a larger amount of water spewed forward at a greater speed, hitting a small tree and breaking the trunk in half. It wasn't a clean cut, and Asuka muttered under her breath, again. Again. She needed to get stronger. She couldn't be a weak mage that she had been when she was younger. She couldn't afford to be a weak shinobi. She couldn't. Not again. So she kept going. As long as there was chakra and magic in her, she wouldn't stop. She wanted to be strong for herself and for others. Determination and resolve fueled her, and so did the memory of her guild, her family, the promise of the future. Whatever lays ahead for me, Wendy thought as she spun kunai into her hands, I'll face it head on. I'll never back down, as long as I have a purpose, as long as I have someone to protect. Nothing in this world will stop me. As long as there are threats like Agnologia. She murmured as the sharp sound of cracking filled the air. She moved atop the moving river, chakra wavering unsteadily before stabilizing. I won't rest. I'll make my own family, one just like my brothers. Just like fairy tale, she said, weaving through different katas atop the water, moving swiftly and elegantly. I'll make them proud. She shifted from form to form, sweat building up from the amount of concentration. She remembered Urza's words and advice, had told that a weapon should always be treated as an extension of oneself, and that's exactly what Asuka did. Her words always echoed in her mind when she used weapons. She didn't even have to think about adjusting her chakra for water walking. It was second nature by now. The movement of water didn't trouble her, and it felt like she was walking on solid ground. The lightning engulfing her kunai grew brighter, and the sound it made was almost comforting. She was getting closer to her goal. It was dark when she returned from the village. Her clothes were dirty and she had sweat clinging to her, but she was happy. She was mastering the use of her weapons, but she knew that she needed a teacher still. Cher had briefly thought about also specializing in a weapon, but she wasn't sure in what or where to start, but it was a good alternative in case her ability to use chakra or magic was compromised. In taijutsu, she had her old fighting style to back on, but she needed to find something more fitting for the battle style of the elemental countries. The battles here were drastically different. She hadn't broached the subject of genjutsu at all, and she wasn't sure she wanted to, but it would be better to try than to not try at all. Regarding her chakra and magic, her reservoirs were increasing steadily day by day. She did daily meditation, did increasingly complex variations of the leaf concentration exercise as well as others that she found in the library. This meant that she had great chakra control, but it wasn't where she wanted it to be yet. She was just starting ninjutsu, trying to learn water release and lightning release, a very effective and lucky combination, especially since they complemented each other very well. She was also continuing her medical studies and was planning on mastering at least one healing technique before she graduated the academy. For now, she had her Slayer magic for another healing alternative. All in all, she was doing pretty good considering that she hasn't even enrolled in the academy yet. I wonder if Natsu would be proud of me. Asuka wondered aloud as she walked the now nearly empty streets of Konoha. I hope that they're doing well, she said, a small frown on her face. Her mind occasionally wandered to the subject. She wondered how they were coping with her death. Were they still mourning her? Would they avenge her killer? Were they living on as she had told them? She hoped so. She didn't want them to be stuck in chaotic cycle of despair because of her. If anything, she wanted them to live on in her memory as she was in theirs, as well as for herself. But she knew that though they were hurt, she just knew that they overcome this. They'd become stronger from it because it was what they did. They may have fallen, but they'd stand up 10 times stronger and determined. Her brothers may as well become an even closer and tight-knit unit than ever because of it, and the thought comforted her. Please, she whispered, staring at the moon with golden eyes. I know that you're all hurting, but please, live on in happiness. It's all that I've ever wished for all of you. She sighed, reveling in the cool breeze, but she stopped sharply when a very familiar scent reached her nose. Her eyes widened and she looked around, but she found that there was no one around her. The streets were completely empty, bereft of even a shinobi. That scent. She walked slowly and she tried to comprehend where it was coming from, but there was no time for thought as the scent got stronger. Her walk became a long stride, and before she knew it she was running, long blue hair trailing behind her. It's getting stronger. She didn't know where she was going. She just followed the sharp scent, eyebrows furrowing as a deep feeling of dread welled in her. Her mind was screaming that danger lay ahead, but she continued anyway. She stopped abruptly when she came to a gate, the symbol of a red and white fan decorated in the center. This is, Asuka said, before she continued. She ran and she looked around, but the streets were desolate and empty, but soon enough that changed as well. What greeted her was horrifying. There were bodies littering the street, blood pooling and staining the ground. It made her breath hitch in her throat, but she continued, even as tears welled in her eyes. She knew with just a glance that they were dead and that there was no way to save them. As she made her way deeper into the compound, her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts as she took in every detail that she could. Who could have done this? She said, deactivating her weights. The Uchiha clan was known to be one of the most formidable clans in Konoha, as well as the entire elemental countries. From what Asuka had understood, it was because of the dojutsu that resided within the clan that allowed them a unique set of skills and powers. They were very powerful, and her instinct reared up because whomever was capable of taking down so many must be a very powerful and skillful being. That's why she deactivated her weights. She didn't need to be burdened by them right now. Asuka wasn't sure how she would pose against the threat currently as she was. There was a possibility that she could stall them, but there's still many unknown variables. Blood stained the walls and there were only brief signs of struggle, which suggested that they were caught off guard, that they weren't fast enough to respond or didn't even know they were in danger until they felt that mortal attack struck. Someone, Asuka murmured to herself. Someone needs to know what's happening, but she stopped sharply, hastily hiding behind a corner as she saw two figures standing in a narrow street. One had long hair, was dressed in black and donned armor, but the most prominent feature were the glowing red eyes staring intently at the other figure, whom was nothing more than a boy near her own age. They held a striking resemblance and held similar scents, and she realized, incredulously and horrifyingly, that they were related. Brothers most likely. You have been jealous of me and you have hated me, he said, voice deep and face devoid of emotion. You have continuously aimed to surpass me. For that I will allow you to live for my sake. Foolish little brother, he said, turning around without a worry. Asuka's thoughts were confirmed and she watched as tears welled in the younger's eyes, filled with intense desperation and confusion as well as mounting anger. If you wish to kill me, then hate me, detest me, and live a long, unsightly life. Run and run, cling to your pitiful life, he said, voice filled with something that Asuka couldn't identify. He turned, only allowing a slight portion of his face to be seen, but his deep red eyes seemed to bore into Asuka and the other. And one day, when you have the same eyes as I, come before me. The other wavered and fell to his knees, but he seemed to gain some strength for some reason. He threw kunai to the other, trying to somehow do something, anything to injure the other. To stop him, but it was futile, Asuka realized. The elder was clearly more powerful than anyone in the compound, as he was the one to slay all of the Uchiha. The elder turned, eyes swirling into a shuriken-like pattern. The younger fell to his knees. He fell unconscious, she realized. But then what shocked her most of all was the tears welling in the elder's eyes. There was a look of deep regret and sorrow, and she almost missed it if she hadn't been paying close attention. He disappeared a moment later, but Asuka stayed hidden, eyes wide and heart pounding in her chest. She's never seen anything like this before, and it was. She didn't understand what was going on. From what she's gathered, the elder had part in the attack, the massacre. She shook her head and she gritted her teeth. She ran forward, skidding to a halt before the other and kneeling beside him. She pulled him close. There was a look of intense fear on his face, even in the realm of unconsciousness. She thought that it was just nightmares, but taking a closer look, she sensed something odd. What is this? She wondered, placing a hand on his head. In her familiarization with chakra and studies, she had learned that there was a certain way that chakra flowed. There was a disruption in the young Uchiha's chakra network and she instantly realized what it was. He's under the effects of a genjutsu. She realized, a very powerful one. I need to stop it. Mavis knows what he's seeing. There aren't any other people alive. I can't sense anyone else. Asuka determined, eyes narrowing as she took deep, calming breaths even as images of blood-stained corpses flashed in her mind. But he left him alive? Why? Was it only because he was his brother? But why did he do it? Why did he say those words? His actions, his tears, they contradict each other. Something else is happening, but what? There's no time for that, Wendy. She said, voice hard and using her name for the first time since she was reborn. White Sky Dragon's divine order. She said, her voice seeming to echo strongly. Her hands glowed a brilliant white and pale blue, a combination of Sky Dragon Slayer magic as well as White Dragon Slayer magic. A magic seal glowed formed beneath her and glowed a blinding blue. Asuka concentrated as she worked to counter the genjutsu in the young Uchiha. It was a hard task, but that's why she was using a combination of both types of Slayer magic. Natsu used a combination of Fire and Lightning Dragon Slayer magic. Gajeel used a combination of Iron and Shadow Dragon magic. Wendy utilized Sky and White Dragon Slayer magic as that was the only one that she really found compatible. Not to mention, the holy aspect of White Dragon Slayer magic amplified her own healing nearly 10 times over. It was very useful. Still, it was a gamble using it on chakra, on a genjutsu, a form of fighting that was foreign to her. Asuka couldn't give up. She couldn't stop. Asuka's eyes narrowed as she felt a waver in the foreign chakra within the boy and there was a snap. She gave a breath of relief as she noticed the young Uchiha's form relaxed and his face smoothed with relief. She stopped channeling her magic and the glow died down. She looked around and she frowned as she remembered the strewn bodies. She swallowed heavily and briefly, she didn't know what to do. Didn't know what to do with the young Uchiha that lay unconscious on her lap. Oji-sama will know what to do. Asuka stood, lifting Sasuke to her back and huffing slight at the additional weight. He weighed under 100 pounds, less than her weights that she's already gotten used to. She was grateful for that. Asuka wanted to panic because she's never really dealt with death in such a large scale nor in such a brutal manner. She realized, however, that death might be something that she would need to get used to. The elemental nations ran by different rules than Earthland. She pushed the thought away, speeding her pace and sticking to shadows as she made her way to the Hokage Tower. She could only hope that the Hokage was there considering the later hour. As she made her way to the tower, her mind once again drifted back to what she had just seen. She couldn't get the image of the elder Uchiha's face out of her eyes, of his tears, and the sheer look of sorrow. Something else happened. She muttered to herself, eyes trained forward. I know it. The scent of blood was nearly overpowering, she thought. But I could smell his scent all over the compound. In fact, there were 3 scents altogether that were common. And I'm sure that the other 2, they're also responsible, one way or another. One of the scents was drastically different from the others. It smelled so much like earth and decaying plant matter. Who would have such a scent? Not to mention, that form standing atop the rooftop, the one in the spiral mask. I couldn't catch his scent from that far away, but I saw him. I bet he has a part to play in this as well. Maybe he assisted the other? I'll keep this to myself for now. This needs a proper investigation, but I can't do anything now. But it's only a matter of time. Secrets have a tendency to surface. Asuka neared the Hokage tower and she jumped towards the wall, making her way up into the window of the Hokage's office. Asuka gave a sigh of relief as she saw that the Hokage was indeed in the office, alone as well. His eyes immediately darted to where she was and his eyes widened ever so slightly when he saw her. Oji-sama, she greeted as she climbed in through the open window. Why it was open she wasn't sure, but it wasn't like many dared to go against the strongest shinobi in the village. I need your help, Asuka-chan, he said, eyes riveting towards the unconscious form on her back. What? A vague feeling of regret formed and already, he had an idea of what happened. It wasn't that long ago, in fact mere moments, that Itachi gave his report and left. Uchiha Itachi was declared a rogue ninja, ranked as an S-class threat in the bingo book, was sacrificing himself for the sake of the village by becoming a pariah, by killing his family in the name of peace and infiltrating an organization that was becoming an increasing threat. The burden would weigh heavily on the young shinobi, but there was no choice. What's done is done. If only Danzo hadn't. Hiruzen's eyes narrowed sharply and his hands shifted through seals and activated his privacy seals. His Anbu were already on their way to the Uchiha clan compound to deal with the bodies. There was no way that he was going to let Danzo dispose of them himself. He didn't trust the man, especially after the conversation that he had with the old warhawk. How far will you go in your misguided deeds, Danzo? He wondered, feeling his age quite sharply in that moment. Tell me everything, Asuka-chan, he said seriously. Asuka nodded, already anticipating the man's orders. She gently lay the young Uchiha on a small couch situated in a corner before coming to stand before the Hokage. Hokage-sama, she said, because there was a need for formality and seriousness at the moment. I was walking back home not too long ago, she started, eyes boring into the Hokage's sharp eyes. When I caught the scent of blood in the air, I thought that I had imagined it, but the scent only grew stronger. I was worried, so I went to investigate. I went to the source. Asuka gave a slight sigh. It might have not been the best idea, but... Asuka grimaced. Hiruzen gave a nod, understanding. Inwardly, he didn't miss the way that every word she said was genuine. There were no visible signs of lies, although he couldn't think of a reason that she would have. He wished, however, most of all, that she could have been spared from all of this, as well as Sasuke. They didn't deserve to see such bloodshed at such a young age, but it seems that no matter what, such things are inevitable. I arrived to the source not long after, the Uchiha clan compound. She remembered the eerie silence, the scent of iron as well as the oppressive air. Remembered the way that the moon almost seemed to glow as red as the blood that had been spilt. Aside from the smell of blood, I knew that something was wrong. There wasn't anyone in the streets, not even shinobi keeping watch. There was just an eerie silence, but as I went deeper into the compound, I found the bodies, she said sadly, mourning the great loss of life. I saw more and more and I was about to turn back to get someone, a shinobi, or even you, but I stopped because I saw him. She pointed towards the figure on the small couch. He was there as well as an elder figure that was apparently his brother. They exchanged words, something having to do about power. I stayed hidden because of the possible danger. She took a moment to gather her thoughts. And then, the younger brother fell unconscious. The brother, he left afterwards without a look back. After that, I carried him here. And that's it, she said coolly, not mentioning her other findings. She didn't even understand herself, and if the thoughts she had herself were obvious, then perhaps the Hokage could glean more information than she could. She wasn't lying, she was just leaving a few details out. There was a nagging feeling that told her it was necessary. Hiruzen took out a pipe, taking a deep inhale of smoke before exhaling it with a breath. His gaze turned back and forth from the two children, regret once again coiling in his gut. He sighed heavily, putting down his pipe. The silence reigned heavily over them, but Asuka waited patiently. She could see the weight that lay heavy on the Hokage's shoulders. She could only imagine the decisions, the sacrifices that he had to make. It took a special type of strength to do so, and she could only imagine the way that such things could affect a person. The Hokage stood, moving towards the window and staring ahead towards the window. "Asuka-chan, I must ask you to keep your findings to yourself," he ordered. "By tomorrow, the entirety of the village will know what has happened. Such thing is inevitable, especially considering the sheer magnitude of such an incident." He turned, eyes boring into Asuka's. "I must ask how you are feeling. It is curious. Most children your age would have been terrified, would have run at the first sign of danger, yet you ran right into it. I understand that you are well mature for your age, but that does not mean that you must withhold all of your feelings. I have to say, children or not, I would have sent them to see a psychologist or something alike. Yet, I have a feeling that you would be opposed to such a thing." As he said those words, his mind flashed towards a very brilliant child, just like the one before him. Kakashi was very jaded, very much broken. His emotions were buried so deeply and left forgotten until the only thing that was left was a very efficient, cold and calculating shinobi. The perfect weapon and one of Hiruzen's many, many regrets. How could this have happened? He wondered. What would you have done, sensei? Asuka debated on what to say. Her eyes drifted towards the young Uchiha, Sasuke apparently. She wondered how he would wake, wondered how he would take the news of his entire family and clan being dead, and it reminded her of herself. Grandine had left her and she hadn't known what had happened. For all she knew, she may as well have died, and the mystery of it hurt, because she often had wondered why. Then she had been left by Jelal, then the Kate shelter. I am sad, Hokage-sama," she said, eyes burning with phantom tears and a small, broken smile forming on her face, and the sheer sorrow and despair startled the Hokage. "The only reason that I am not reacting as others is because I know loss. I am very familiar with pain and I wish that I weren't. I can't lie and tell you that I am like any other child because you and I know that I am not," she admitted. "I wouldn't want to go to a psychologist or any such things. I wouldn't want them to give me empty words coming from an unfamiliar face. She sighed heavily, eyes lidded heavily with tiredness. Hiruzen lifted a hand. "I understand, my dear. There's no need to say more." She was a peculiar child, smart and intelligent, and already he could see her going a long way. "I'll have some of my shinobi take Sasuke-kun to the hospital. I must go survey the damage myself." "Again, Hokage-sama," Asuka said softly, "may I go with Uchiha-san to the hospital? I don't know him, but—" Hiruzen smiled tiredly, affection for the girl trenching deep in his heart. "To think, I barely learned of her existence not that long ago, and already—" "Of course, my dear. We'll have a doctor look at him, and after, I'll have a guard escort you home." "That's not necessary, Oji-sama," she protested, "I can go on my own. I don't want to be a bother to the shinobi." "Nonsense. But I must ask, Asuka-chan," he said, his tone serious yet asking for understanding. "It would be better if you kept your distance from Sasuke-kun afterwards. He will no doubt be overwhelmed with the attention from this unfortunate event. I can't say that he'll be too happy about, especially considering that his mental and emotional state might not be in the best condition. Do you understand, Asuka-chan?" Asuka nodded. "I understand, Hokage-sama." He nodded, satisfied with the answer given. He gave a flare of his chakra and instantly, a squadron of Anbu was in his office, all kneeling awaiting his orders. "I want Kuma, Tori, hubby to take Asuka-chan and Uchiha Sasuke to the hospital. Make sure Sasuke-kun gets medical attention, and I want him guarded at all times until I say otherwise, am I understood?" he ordered. "Hi, Hokage-sama," they called out, perfectly in sync. "The rest of you come with me." Asuka marveled at the swiftness that they had appeared in. She wondered if it's some sort of teleportation technique. She made a mental note to ask around later. She was sure that such a technique would be useful later. "I'll see you later, my dear," Hiruzen said, giving Asuka a small smile. Asuka bowed lightly towards the other. "Ah. Of course, Oji-sama," she said, giving the other a big smile of her own. There was a faint sound of something akin to shock, but Asuka had her attention on the Hokage. Thank you for everything. Hiruzen merely nodded. No, my dear, it is I that must thank you. He left a moment later, dreading the chaos that would soon follow. He could already imagine the reactions that the clans would give. He could already imagine the sheer demands that the civilians would have. He needed to act soon and carefully. There was no room for mistakes. Soon enough, the entirety of the elemental nations would know of the demise of the Uchiha clan. It would be seen as a heavy blow to Konoha, and they couldn't afford to look weak. Especially considering the tension that Konoha had with Iwa and Kumo, not to mention the straining relationship with Suna. Asuka watched the Hokage leave, worry in her mind, but she knew that the other was Hokage for a reason. There would have to be a truly formidable opponent to even pose a threat to the Sandaime Hokage, student of the Nidaime Hokage. Let's go, Asuka-chan. Tori said, arms laden with Sasuke. She blinked and nodded. Kuma picked her up ever so gently. It didn't show, but he was half afraid he'd break the little girl. She seemed too small and slight, yet there was something about her that spoke of strength and resolve. He could have been imagining things, but he'd pushed the thought away. He had duties to attend to. They moved swiftly from rooftop to rooftop, and they made it into the hospital in less than 5 minutes. In their wake, civilians alike scattered away from them hurriedly, casting looks of fear and weariness towards them. They paid them no mind. Some civilians tended to have many misconceptions about shinobi, held many irrational fears and assumptions about them, especially towards higher-level shinobi such as Junin, SP, and Anbu, even though they were the ones that shielded them from the darkness of the world. It was tiring and more than a little insulting, but any shinobi worth anything knew to not pay them mind. Excuse me, hubby stepped forward, his moss and overall demeanor painting an intimidating image for the medic that he was addressing, whom was painfully civilian. The medic stuttered and cringing a moment later as she tried to gather what semblance of control she had. How can I help you, Anbu-san? She asked, moving away from the shinobi. Asuka watched interestedly, all the while held in Kuma's arms, whom also made an intimidating image. They all did, really. Still, Asuka couldn't quite understand why there was such fear on their faces. Why would they fear those that protected them? It made no sense. It was like the residents of Magnolia being afraid of Gildarts. Ridiculous. The man was inconvenient in that he often destroyed things with his magic, but he was very kind and protective of his guild and those he held dear. There were looks of surprise and whispers broke into the air, yet the shinobi ignored them with ease. We require medical assistance for Uchiha-san. Hubby answered, completely disregarding the pitiful attempts of the civilians to be discreet about their words. They must really think lowly of them if they thought that such efforts would be enough. The medic turned her gaze to the young child held in the ANBU's arms before comprehension dawned on her. Why, yes, she murmured dazedly, of course. She snapped upright before turning. Follow me please, she said, hurriedly making her way to one of the free and empty rooms, private as well. I'll take over from here, Keiko-san. A voice called out, and they turned to see another medic making his way towards them. There was a serious look on his face, and the way he held himself spoke that he was clearly a shinobi. Is he a Irio Nin, medic Nin? Asuka wondered. He was clearly a shinobi. The way he walked gave him away. Every movement he made was calculated, and there was a sharp intelligence in his eyes. He seemed intimidating as well, and it showed in the way Keiko cowered away from him ever so slightly, causing him to narrow his eyes ever so slightly. Maybe intimidation is a trait that shinobi have to have? Asuka mused. Oh, of course, Osamu-san. Keiko stuttered, and she didn't waste her time getting away. The shinobi watched her go in silence. Osamu shook his head, muttering under his breath as he motioned towards the bed. Tori placed Sasuke on the bed with care and moved back to make room. The medic stepped forward with a frown, beginning to take his vitals and examination. What happened? Can you tell me any details? Osamu said as he took out a fresh chart to write on. He briefly gave a glance towards the blue-haired girl staring intently at him and was slightly surprised by the girl's golden eyes. He pushed his attention towards his task instead. Uchiha Sasuke, Tori started, sole survivor of the Uchiha clan massacre. He answered, there's not much that we know, Osamu-san. It was no use keeping the information of the clan massacre a secret. The entire village will know by morning. It wasn't like something on that scale could be covered up. Osamu's eyes widened in shock, and it was a struggle to keep his composure in light of such news, but he succeeded and continued with his diagnostic in silence. He ran through various hand signs, and a moment later, his hands glowed green and he began to check for any anomalies. Kuma took the moment to place Asuka down on one of the chairs. Somehow, he forgot that he even had the girl in his arms. She was incredibly quiet and still, taking in the surroundings and happenings with a curious and critical eye. He could feel the questioning looks that his comrades threw his way, but he steadfastly ignored them. The shinobi stood in silence, and Asuka did as well. She watched with interest as the medic went through what was dubbed as Iryo ninjutsu. It was fascinating to see it up close, and she paid very close attention to the hand signs. She hoped that the doctor didn't find any sign of her magic. She wasn't sure if he did or if anyone could in the first place. She was going to use her magic out in the open, of course, but she would do so on her own terms and when she wanted to. The use of magic would bring questions, especially considering that the jutsu she had was seal-less, but she was already planning on explanations. She was planning on passing it off as unique Kekkei Genkei. There were downsides to this though. She wasn't naive enough to dismiss the rumors of what those with Kekkei Genkei. There would be greedy individuals that would be power-hungry, that would be seeking her power, such as King Faust of Aeolus, but she had dealt with him and she was planning to the same here as well. There was no way she was going to end up in the Clan Restoration Act either. She had thought long and hard, and she wasn't even sure if she was planning to have a family in the future, so uncertain was the life of a shinobi. That, and she didn't even know if it was possible to pass down. She also didn't like the idea of having anyone with her DNA with plans of malicious intents or misuse. There was already enough bloodshed in the elemental nations, she wasn't going to provide another means for more. Besides, as selfish as it sounded, her magic was hers. As such, she was planning on sealing her magic. When she died, her magic would disappear into nothingness, and if there was ever a time that her DNA or organic material ended in the hands of someone else, the sample wouldn't be viable, be it saliva, blood, hair or otherwise. Anyone that went through the trouble of obtaining a sample would be severely disappointed and in for a nasty surprise. Osamu hummed underneath his breath as his mind assessed the results that were given. Uchiha Sasuke is in perfect health, he announced, looking up from his task to see the shinobi paying close attention to his words. There's nothing wrong with him except for a slight case of chakra exhaustion. He had been expecting some sort of injury or even tampering with chakra, but it seemed like that wasn't the case. All he needs is rest and he'll be fine. A Yamanaka will be here in the morning to help assess his mental state. The Anbu glanced towards each other before turning to the medic and nodding in understanding. Two of the Anbu moved towards strategic locations in the room. Thank you for your assistance, Osamu-san, Kuma replied. Osamu nodded, glancing towards the Uchiha once more and finishing his notes on the chart. He hanged the chart on the end of the bed and a moment later, left the room without any preamble. Asuka was relieved that there was no sign of magic in the young Uchiha, but it would still require further investigating to see if her magic could or couldn't be sensed. She wasn't leaving anything to chance. She wanted to be absolutely sure. She moved from her seat, nearing the edge of the bed, and she stared intently at the still form. His face was serene compared to the look of agony that he had earlier. She could hardly believe everything that had happened. It all seemed so surreal, so much like a nightmare. But what she felt was nothing compared to what the Uchiha would feel when he woke. It sparked a feeling of empathy and understanding in her. Without a thought, she grabbed the young Uchiha's hand, completely disregarding the intense stares of the shinobi at her back. She felt his hand twitch ever so slightly and she wondered if he would be able to hear her words. She wanted to try anyway. Uchiha-san, she said softly, biting her lip briefly as she tried to put her thoughts into words. I don't know if you can hear me, but I hope that you can. She said, just loud enough to be heard. When you wake up tomorrow, the entire world that you knew will be in great disorder. Those dear to you will be gone, and I have no doubt that you'll be angry and sad. You'll be wondering why. Why did this happen? Why me? Why my family and not somebody else's? Asuka's voice was heavy with emotion, remembering her own painful encounters where she nearly lost hope, when she had been at the edge of despair, but it will be hard, Uchiha-san. I won't lie. It will be a lot worse before it gets any better. There was no use for sugarcoating her words. She didn't want to be given false hope or promises. She wouldn't want to see the pity in the eyes of people, didn't want their false sympathies. She was sure that the Uchiha wouldn't either. You'll probably be angry, you'll be sad, and be full of hate. She swallowed heavily, hand tightening ever so slightly. But you can't let this get to you. You must overcome your fears, your anger, your hate. You must think over what happened, on why, because things like this. She said, things like this don't happen without a reason. And maybe you'll even come to seek vengeance, Uchiha-san, but if you go down that path, it could lead to a path of darkness, but maybe you could avoid that. But most of all, you must remember that there are walls that power alone can't break through. It's people, not power, that matters. She sighed heavily, reminiscing about her friends and brothers. She thought back to their adventures, thought about the various enemies that were thrown their way. Each time, it was someone stronger, and there were times that seemed that they would lose, but they've always managed the impossible and succeeded where many others would have failed. I don't know if my words are even making sense, Uchiha-san. She stared at her lap, eyes heavy-lidded with emotion. But I hope that when you awake, that with time you manage to overcome this terrible nightmare. I can only hope that you get someone to help you through this as well. Having friends, the bonds that you make with them, I can't describe the amount of happiness it could bring you, the amount of strength that you can find in one another. She gave a watery smile, even as a tear slid down her cheek. She always told herself to not cry, but she couldn't help it, and besides, they were tears of joy. She cherished the memories that she had with her nakama and brothers, both the good and the bad. She stayed silent for a few moments, not knowing what else to say. She hummed softly under her breath, and before she knew it, she was singing a soft melody that echoed hauntingly and beautifully in the air. Words are born into air, and quickly fade out in the wind, but they find their way inside you, where they live forevermore. When the skies are dark and full of rain, look inside your heart. The light, so warm, will and all aglow, shining just like the sun. You can see just how much you've grown, how strong you are. A love will open up to you, and it starts from the day that you first heard those words. She let the melody fade out softly. She stared at the Uchiha for a moment and wondered if the reason that she felt such emotion was because she herself had gone through a similar despair. She understood his pain. Closing her eyes, she gathered her composure. She felt tired, and all she wanted to do at the moment was go home and rest. She let go of the Uchiha's hand, blinking in slight surprise as she felt it briefly tighten around her own. She smiled slightly and she backed away from the bed and turned to the shinobi. The Anbu stood stock still, almost seeming like statues. They stayed that way until Asuka turned towards them. Though they didn't show it, the melody that she sang rang in them. It brought a feeling of warmth in their hearts. It gave them much to reflect about, brought memories to the surface. And her words, they were extremely mature for a child. A child had no business knowing such matters, but her words implied that she had gone through something painful, something that brought such insight and was perhaps what allowed her to mature. Maybe that was why she was close to the Hokage and was allowed to call him Oji-sama. The Hokage saw something in her. Maybe I should take a break and see the others, just for a bit. Tori thought, and he glanced towards his comrades. They didn't show it, but he was sure that they were thinking along the same lines, even if Kuma wouldn't admit. He knew them too well. Kuma turned his head ever so slightly to the side. I'm ready to go now, Asuka announced, peering undauntingly to the shinobi. I'll escort you home, Asuka-sama, Tori said, dismissing her sputters and look of shock and confusion. Please don't call me that, shinobi-san, Asuka protested. Tori grinned underneath his mask, but he gave nothing away. He picked her up ever so gently as Kuma had in. Please tell me where you live, Asuka-sama, and I'll get you there quickly. Asuka blushed slightly, but she quickly rattled off her address. Before they left, she turned slightly in Tori's grip and gave the shinobi a wave of goodbye and a smile. It was nice meeting you. The other two shinobi merely gave a nod. Tori took a shortcut and dived out the window, smiling slightly at Asuka's surprised gasp. She gripped tightly at his armored vest, but she wasn't afraid. Asuka had spent a lot of time in the air with the Exceed, and she would never be uncomfortable in the air. It was her realm, her element, after all. They went from rooftop to rooftop again, apparently the preferred method of travel for Konoha shinobi next to trees. They arrived quickly to Asuka's apartment building, and the Anbu placed her down, staring up at the apartment building with a nagging sense of déjà vu. Thank you for bringing me here, Tori-san, Asuka said, peering up to the shinobi with golden eyes. "I'll escort you inside to your apartment." Asuka didn't bother to argue. She could see clearly now that shinobi could be as stubborn as fairy tale mages. It was a comforting thought that she could draw similarities between the two. Maybe there would be other shinobi that were as unique as her guildmates. She found that she looked forward to meeting them if the thought held true. They went inside the apartment, walking up the stairs and going all the way to the 4th floor. The shinobi took note of every detail. There were some things that stood out to him, like the complete lack of chakra signals in the floor that Asuka lived in. It felt colder too, but it seemed like the blue-haired girl didn't even notice. There were a few flickering lights that blinked on and off eerily. Other than that, there didn't seem to be anything that was really of concern, but there was still something odd that the shinobi couldn't quite place. Asuka stopped in front of her apartment and she unlocked the door without hesitation and was greeted with a familiar blast of cold air. She had a hunch that the shinobi wouldn't leave until she was safely within her apartment. "Please take care, Asuka-san." The Anbu made to leave, but before he could, Asuka stopped him. "Wait," she shouted urgently. "Please wait a moment, Tori-san." The Anbu turned questioningly towards the young girl. "One moment please." She disappeared into her apartment, but she returned not a moment later with something in hand. She held it to the other in an offering. "Please take this with you, Tori-san." The Anbu tensed ever so slightly as he stared at the stark white bandages in the girl's pale hands. How did she? Tori took a quick survey of himself and he could find no giveaway, no sign whatsoever. "I could smell the blood on you, Tori-san," Asuka explained, giving the other a worried look. "I heard that shinobi tend to avoid going to the hospital or receiving medical assistance. I don't want you to feel obligated to take it, Tori-san, but it would ease my mind if you would take it. You don't have to use them. You can do with them what you like, even burn them if you want. I don't know why shinobi do that, avoid assistance that is, but their reasons are their own I suppose, but please, keep in mind if you ever find yourself injured, please come to me no matter the time or place. I know that you may not trust me or even have a reason to do so, but I promise if you see a threat in my actions you can stop me however you deem necessary," she said, determined. It was. Tori didn't know what to say or think. The words wouldn't come. There was no movement, no words. He took the bandages with a gloved hand and he disappeared with a flash of leaves. Asuka released a breath she didn't know she was holding and she stared at the empty hallway for a moment before closing her door. She locked her door and activated the meager protective seals that she had. They would do nothing against shinobi, but they'd deter civilians. She walked slowly to her bed, feeling a heavy weight settle over her like an invisible pressure. She sighed heavily and she stared at the ceiling. Her mind drifted and soon enough she found her eyes becoming heavy and she gave in to the world of sleep. She dreamed of Grandine that night. She found herself replaying the memory of when she had come to an empty clearing, remembered waiting for hours in hope of the other returning and making excuse after excuse to explain her departure before she finally gave in to her panic and despair. She remembered the terror of wandering the woods, remembered the relief she felt when Jelal Mistogan had found her. Remembered feeling the same terror when he too abandoned her, when she found out that her guild was nothing more than illusion. Her dreams were dyed red and she saw the corpses of Uchihas strewn across the ground, the scent of fear, of despair, of death. She woke up with a painful ball of emotion in her throat and she stared at the ceiling, eyes unseeing. She took a deep and steadying breath and she resolved to overcome those dark memories. She'd replace them with something better. Replace them with something 10 times as meaningful, something that brought her strength and happiness instead of despair. "I'm not home," she said aloud, "but this is my new home now. It's time I made new memories, but at the same time, I won't forget what I went through. I can't forget the pain that I felt because it was through those trials that I got stronger." She lifted a hand, raised as if trying to reach the ceiling. She smiled slightly, feeling the slight tingle and turned her eyes to the side, seeing the new dark blue mark that adorned her shoulder. "I won't forget. I can't. But I'll live on, I'll move forward. One step at a time." The Hokage's words couldn't be truer, Asuka found. The day after the massacre, the news of the destruction of the Uchiha clan spread like wildfire despite the attempts made to mitigate it. It was the talk of the village and for weeks on afterwards, Asuka couldn't go anywhere without at least hearing some type of mention of the Uchiha clan and its sole survivor. The civilians weren't letting go of the topic and the shinobi were at least polite enough to not speak of such things openly. Asuka could always see the pity in the eyes of the civilians, the false sympathy in their words. Oh, poor Sasuke-kun. I bet the dearie is missing his family. That Uchiha, I can't imagine what he's going through. Uchiha Itachi is a traitor to the village. Why didn't we see it earlier? Sasuke-kun is the last of the Uchiha. I wonder if he's going to try to restore it? Minako, be sure to be kind to Sasuke-kun. Maybe he'll give you the honor of restoring the prestigious Uchiha clan one day if you try hard enough. It disgusted Asuka, angered her really. Everywhere she went she was reminded of that fateful night, and although she had accepted what happened and felt only sorrow in the memory, she didn't want to keep the ghosts of that day lingering. She could only imagine what Sasuke was feeling, especially since he was alone and had no one to help him through it. She couldn't believe some of the comments that were made by the civilians. The ones that really settled her were the ones where civilians encouraged young daughters to get closer to the last, loyal, Uchiha. They had placed the young Uchiha as a goal to get to and placed him on a pedestal, saw him as what they thought he was when Asuka was sure that there was hardly anyone that actually knew the young Uchiha. Not to mention, everyone knew that Uchiha Sasuke was now enrolled in the academy and was set to attend in a few short weeks. Everyone was scrambling to also enroll in the academy in hopes of being with the young Uchiha, and Asuka thought that they were ignorant to what they were signing up for. The majority were young girls and they had no idea what being a shinobi of what being a kunoichi entitled, and Asuka could see that many of them wouldn't make it past the first year, or even the pre-examinations. Asuka herself has already enrolled and she passed the pre-examination designed to weed out the truly hopeless cases. She felt kind of bad when she saw how many didn't make it, but at the same time she thought that was what they deserved. Being a shinobi was serious and treating it like a joke was something that she couldn't stand. Not when she saw many shinobi coming back from missions weary and injured, looking like they were sorely in need of rest and peace. Most of the time now Asuka spent her time in her home, going to the library or training. It was almost time for the academy to start and Asuka increased her training because of it and because she needed to. She switched out her old weight to more discreet bands that increased in weight with a burst of chakra. She had 4 now, 1 on each arm and leg. Each weighed a total of 60 pounds. Weighing a grand total of 240. She was planning on tripling that weight by the time she was in her 4th year of the academy, as she found that by internally circulating chakra it made it easier to carry the heavy weight, but she used the minimal amount required. Her strength and endurance factor helped. As for ninjutsu, she's learned 3 new jutsu, 2 outside her natural affinity. One was called Lightning Style Bullet, Powerful Breath, Raiden Dan. Ibuki. The user creates a condensed surge of lightning in their fists. By thrusting forward, the user could release a powerful lightning bolt and could be conducted with a water source to hit multiple opponents. The other 2 techniques were earth and fire release respectively. The fire release technique was called Fire Style. Fire Dragon Bomb, Kaiden. Karyuden, it was a basic fire jutsu where the user exhaled a flame breath from their mouth. The last one was Earth Style. Double Suicide Decapitation Technique, Doden. Shinju Zanshu no Jutsu. It allowed for the user to be concealed underground and allowed them the ability to drag the object of their attack down into the earth, robbing them of their freedom and leaving them unable to move and vulnerable. She found that while it wasn't impossible to learn techniques outside one's affinity, it took a great deal more effort and concentration, but she was planning on rectifying that with a great deal more practice. The variety fighting styles and methods offered to shinobi was astounding, and Asuka was going to take advantage of it, affinity or not, limitations or not. She was a dragon slayer. Limitations didn't tend to apply to them. Asuka was making note of what she needed to buy for the academy. She wanted to be prepared and she didn't want to leave to the last minute, so she already bought what she needed. She didn't want to go through the rush of people. She'd bought a few battle kimonos, similar to the pink one that she had been given in the celestial spirit world. She had them in multiple colors, but she stayed mostly to the dark scale so she'd be harder to notice. She bought thigh-high socks as well as leggings, all made from very durable material. There were also a few pairs of black, heeled shinobi sandals that ended just below her knees. She'd also bought more casual clothing for the academy, such as numerous battle skirts that had shorts underneath them, mesh shirts, and different kimono tops that were fairly cheap. She knew that in the academy, their clothing had a high chance of getting dirty or torn. She'd also bought a new set of weapons. She bought a set of kunai, shuriken, a bundle of wire, sealing paper and ink, and a tanto. It had taken some time, but Asuka had finally made headway in the Fuinjutsu book that Soma had gifted her. At first, she couldn't understand what she was reading at all because it was so confusing and complex, but she realized later that she needed to think differently. She needed to view the material from a different angle, and then, when she revisited the material again, everything made much better sense, although she still had to reread the material a few times, just to make sure. It wouldn't do to make mistakes, especially when concerning Fuinjutsu. Choosing a weapon had been really hard, but it had helped to take her taijutsu into consideration. She had decided that she wanted to have different fighting styles, one for long range and another for close combat. The Tanto and Naginata allowed for that. Briefly, she had considered the use of Tessen and other types of battle fans, but she decided not to. She already had amazing control over wind, possibly to a degree greater than the greatest of wind users. She could create and control wind without a thought and could be amazingly destructive and useful, especially with the use of fire. It was one of the reasons why she was determined to go outside her natural affinity. She wanted to have a wide range of abilities and techniques. She wanted to be as unpredictable as possible, and she knew that in order to do that, she'd need to downplay her abilities to do just that. At least, for the moment. Asuka had decided that when she entered the academy, she would hide the full extent of her abilities so that she would be underestimated, so that she could spring them up in the moment least expected and most needed. That didn't mean she was going to do horribly in the academy, however. On the contrary, Asuka planned to be ranked as the best fledgling kunoichi. There was a title for it, but Asuka couldn't remember what it was called. She wondered if it'd be easy to reach the rank she wanted. As far as she knew, there would be a mix of civilian and clan children. She would have no problem with the civilian children, she just wasn't sure about the clan children. She knew that as clan members, they would have received training already. The extent of their power and skills were unknown to her, but she had an idea of what their abilities from what she had read about them in books and what was commonly known. The Aburame wielded insects in battle, and they held a symbiotic relationship. The insects would reside in their bodies and in exchange, obey the host's will. They could have thousands, and even possibly millions of insects, something in which Asuka was curious about. Admittedly, most would be disgusted at the idea of hosting insects in one's body, but to Asuka, it was fascinating. The Uchiha held the Sharingan, a well-renowned dojutsu, which granted them a number of abilities and made them experts in genjutsu. It allowed for fast reflexes and the like, not to mention, the Uchiha were also known for their great skill and affinity in fire jutsu. The Yamanaka were known for their mind techniques as well as their knowledge of the mind and other branches of studies related to it, such as psychology. Their proficiency in mind techniques allowed them to be experts in espionage, intelligence gathering and ultimately, interrogation. Asuka wasn't looking forward to meeting them. In fact, she wanted to figure out a way to protect her mind. She didn't want anyone to know that she was originally from another world. It could lead to another incident like Edala's. She had a few ideas, but she wasn't keen on testing if they actually worked. Then there were the Inuzuka, a clan closely affiliated with Ninken. They're easily identified by the red, fang-like markings on their faces. They used Ninken in battle, treated them as an extension of themselves, and were treated as more than weapons. They regarded Ninken as family. The Inuzuka were known for their animal-like attributes as well, such as their sharp teeth, claw-like nails, enhanced senses and more. The Hyuga clan held the Byakugan, a Kekkei Genkei that allowed them to have extended vision and granted them the ability to see through solid objects and even the chakra system. They were also known for their unique fighting style and ability to expel chakra from any tenketsu in the body. The Nara clan were known for their ability to manipulate shadows and sheer intelligence. Not to mention, they were well known for their deep knowledge of medicine and healing arts. They held a special alliance with the Yamanaka and Akamichi clans and for generations, formed the Ini Shika Cho trios. Messing with one clan of the trio was not advised. They'd follow each other to war if need be. That's how deep the alliance and comradeship were between the three clans. Last but not least, there was the Akamichi clan. They were known for their ability to manipulate their size and body weight. This granted them great physical strength and were able to convert calories into chakra, which they used in their clan techniques. On another note, they were also widely known for their amazing culinary skills, something Asuka greatly approved of. Asuka was actually looking forward to meeting members of different clans. It'd be like meeting mages that all specialized in a certain magic, which was a peculiar thought but pleasing nonetheless. Still, she wasn't sure what class she'd end up in. For all she knew, she might end up in one made entirely of civilians. She wasn't sure how it was that the academy sorted its students. It seemed that time passed by fast. The day had finally come. The first day of the academy. Asuka had woken very early in the morning in preparation. She had placed aside her clothes that she was going to wear. A black skirt with discreet black fitting shorts, a deep red kimono top tied with a black sash, thigh-high black stockings and sandals that easily blended with them. Her shower was quick and Asuka had spent a moment staring in the mirror. She looked the same yet so different. Her hair was a shade darker and it reached just a little past her thighs. Her eyes were golden, something she often wondered whom she had inherited from before she realized that they were the same gold as when she was in Dragon Force. Her skin was as pale as before. The one thing that gave her immense comfort, however, was the dark blue emblem on her shoulder as well as the one that covered nearly the entirety of her back. The fairy tale emblem had returned after days on end of using magic and readjusting to the feeling of switching between magic and chakra. Then, the Dragon Slayer emblem had reappeared days afterwards. It was a symbol of a winding and menacing dragon, jaw open and displaying sharp teeth. All the Slayers had them after deciding that a symbol and a connection was needed and appropriate among them. It served the same purpose as the fairy tales, it displayed her allegiance and it provided for a way to keep in check with the others health-wise and magic-wise, and cemented a deep bond between them. It was myriad of vibrant colors representing the different elements that they wielded, such as red for Natsu's passionate fires and a mesmerizing pure white for Sting's white and holy magic and almost tribal in appearance, and it traced patterns on her back, shoulders, and chest. The residual magic was comforting, but as much as she tried, she could sense nothing else in the marks. She had accepted it, however. She had to. Asuka sighed as she looked away from the mirror and hurried in dressing. She brushed her hair and briefly debated on which style to put it in before donning her customary twin tails. She decided to don hair accessories as she had before. She had a multitude of them and briefly, she had thought about not wearing them, but she couldn't bring herself to part with them. It helped when she found numerous accessories in shinobi stores that also doubled as means for weapons and other purposes. The ones that she was currently wearing were a deep red wing-like attachments that complemented her outfit. She smiled as she looked in the mirror, satisfied. Asuka made her way to the kitchen, preparing breakfast easily enough as well as food to serve as her lunch. Her bento was large, probably on the scale of an Akamichi's, but it was necessary. Dragon Slayers tended to have large appetites, although she herself has never ate the way that Natsu and the others managed to. Asuka wasn't sure who would be able to eat more, the Akamichi or her brothers. Breakfast was done and over with soon enough. She packed away her bento as well, which consisted of various meats, fruits and vegetables, and placed her dishes in the sink to soak. She grabbed her black bag that held her school supplies and made her way to the door, taking one last look around her small apartment before turning and slamming the door behind her. It was still early as she made her way through the streets and to the academy. There were only shinobi wandering the streets and the civilians were just getting out and about. There was a cool breeze and there were clouds drifting lazily in the sky. It's such a nice day today, she thought, a smile forming on her face. I hope everything goes well today. She arrived to the academy building soon enough. The clearing before it was still empty and Asuka realized that she had arrived an hour early. I guess I got a little bit overexcited, she said aloud, moving towards the empty swing in front of the academy. Maybe I should just wait for a bit out here. She swung gently back and forth on the swing, hair fluttering gently in the wind. She hummed quietly to herself as time passed. She watched as people steadily arrived to the academy and she felt a pang in her heart as she saw proud parents escorting their children. They all held smiles on their faces, were laughing together, and she wished that she had that for herself too for a moment, but she shook the thought away. Asuka adjusted her skirt, wiping away the imaginary dust with her hands. She made her way to the academy entrance, trying to figure out where she was supposed to go before she saw the lists on the tacked onto the walls. The names of students were listed in alphabetical order along with the room, and she easily found her own name, listed only as Asuka, no last name. Her hand lingered for a moment on her name before she turned away, intent on looking for her classroom. It's strange, Asuka thought. I've never gone to school before. Grandine was the only one that taught me, and everything else I learned by myself from books, observation and trial and error. Not to mention, the guilds helped a lot in other things. It was easy enough to find her classroom, and as she walked in, she noticed that it was mostly empty except for a few other people. Her classmates, she realized. She debated for a moment, trying to decide on where to sit. A girl with short hair was sitting in a corner, looking awfully shy. There was a boy with dark hair and a ponytail sitting in another desk 2 rows ahead, sleeping easily. There another dark-haired male dressed in dark blue sitting next to a window, looking outside with dark eyes. He looks familiar, she thought. An image of a young unconscious Uchiha flashed in her mind. Ah, is that Uchiha-san? Should I sit next to him? She hesitated for a moment before she made up her mind, and she made her way to the Uchiha with a determined expression. The young Uchiha looked away from the window, turning his gaze instead to Asuka, who merely smiled slightly. "May I sit here?" she asked politely. The other stared at her and shrugged without a word before turning back to the window, completely disregarding her. Asuka sat on the seat next to his, putting her in the middle. She didn't mind his dismissive attitude, after all, she didn't know him and he didn't know her. She sat quietly, and idly she withdrew one of her sketchbook from her bag to keep her occupied. It would be a while yet before class officially started. She'd taken art as a hobby, one of many actually, as well as calligraphy, as she found that it was necessary in the art of fuinjutsu. One needed to be careful in the way they drew their characters, lest something go wrong. She had taken up art because it helped to spur her creativity, and it was enjoyable overall to her, next to cooking, that is. She didn't say a word to the Uchiha the entire time she waited. She just drew random sketches in her book, vaguely realizing that she was doodling chibi versions of the celestial spirits. It made her smile slightly. She only looked up from her book every once in a while, watching as the students steadily trickled in. It was louder in the classroom. Asuka frowned slightly as she paid more attention to her surroundings. There were many glances thrown her way, but she realized that they were mostly aimed at the young Uchiha beside her. Is that him? That's Sasuke-kun. He's so cool. He's so cute. But who's that sitting next to him? Who does she think she is? Asuka frowned, but she gave no indication of hearing the words. Girls giggled and whispered back and forth, not even giving a single glance towards the other boys in the classroom. There were annoyed looks given on behalf of the boys, and more than one glare was aimed at the Uchiha, but the latter seemed to disregard everything with a cool look, which only served to incite the passions of the besotted girls. It was an unsettling sight, Asuka realized with a slight frown. Then, the door slammed open and a blonde walked in wearing a white t-shirt and orange shirt. There was a gin stretched over his face and there was whisker-like marks on his cheeks. "The Uzumaki is here, Datbeo," he announced. Asuka raised an eyebrow, a small amused smile forming on her face. Who is that? She wondered. She could tell immediately that he was a lively character. He almost reminded her of Natsu. "I'm going to be Hokage, Datbeo," he announced with the utmost conviction, and Asuka was slightly surprised by the announcement. "Like that'll happen, loser." A voice called out from the back, and the blonde, Naruto, immediately whirled back with an indignant finger pointed to the back of the room. "Who said that? Say that to my face," he challenged, hand curled into a fist and a fierce scowl on his face. There were scattered laughs, and Asuka frowned, displeased with the mocking laughter and the cruel words. Before anyone else could say anything, the door to the classroom opened again. A man with brown hair tied into a ponytail walked in. He had a distinct scar crossing his nose and he held kind brown eyes. "Settle down, class," he said, coming to stand in the center. Everyone scrambled to be seated and the voices steadily died down. "My name is Amino Uruka and I'll be your sensei for the next 4 years. Before we get started, I want everyone to introduce yourselves and say a bit about yourselves." "Nothing much, Oki?" He pointed to a row. "Let's start from here." Asuka listened closely, patiently waiting her turn. She was guilty of tuning out every once in a while, though. She found out that there were more clan children than civilians in her class, and she carefully listened to their introductions. "Nara Shikamaru. I like to watch clouds," the boy yawned, "and sleep." "Aburame Shino. I like insects," a boy with glasses said so quietly that Asuka was sure that most of the students couldn't hear him. A girl with short hair and white eyes twisted her hands together nervously and just as quietly as the Aburame said, Hyuga Hinata. Like F flowers. Inazuka Kiba. A boy grinned, displaying a set of sharp fangs. I like to train and I like dogs. Akamichi. A chubby boy munched on snacks without a thought. Choji. I love food. My name is Yamanaka Ino. A blonde-haired girl with pupil-less blue eyes said. She had a smirk on her face and she was gazing at Sasuke with a love-struck look. I like Sasuke-kun, she said unashamedly, causing many groans of annoyance and protests from the girls. No way, a pink-haired girl protested. Haruno Sakura, I love Sasuke-kun, she declared passionately, hands clasped together and staring at Sasuke with hopeful eyes. Asuka looked at the girls with a look of confusion. Didn't they just meet Uchiha-san? Are they fangirls? She wondered. Out of the corner of her eye, she stole a glance to the Uchiha just in time to catch a fleeting look of annoyance cross his face. The Uzumaki said. My name is Uzumaki Naruto. I love ramen. And I'm going to be Hokage, Datbeo. He declared. Asuka blinked, and then she realized that it was her turn. She fidgeted slightly in her seat before standing up so the rest of the class could see her, just as the others did, and bowed slightly to the class. My name is Asuka. There were many things that she liked, but most of them were things that she couldn't say, yet. I like to learn new things. Things like new techniques, new history, new chakra building exercises and more. Hey, a voice called out from the classroom and Asuka looked around to find a boy with black hair glaring quite fiercely at her. I know you, he said. You're that no-name girl from the orphanage. There were looks thrown her way and Asuka frowned, hands curling into fists. Hey, you're right, a girl added, peering at Asuka with a suspicious look in her eye. I've heard about you before. My mom told me to stay away from you, she said, and many other students murmured in consent, notably from the civilians. The clan children were looking around in confusion and were turning their gazes at Asuka as well. Asuka swallowed harshly, wondering if it was because of Rei that this happened. She was a maternal figure to orphan children as well as the headmistress, and perhaps that gave her some influence. Perhaps the civilians saw her as a figure that was very generous and caring, and maybe that was why. Settle down, children, Iruka said, a frown on his face. They didn't listen, however. My mom said that she had the eyes of a demon. My dad told me not to talk to her. He said not to look at her either. Yeah, I don't really get it though. It's because she's a freak, that's why. Rei-sama said so. A girl with brown hair spat, eyes glaring hatefully towards Asuka. Enough, Iruka snapped, stopping another student from adding their own comment, no doubt just the same as the others. I will not have this kind of attitude or behavior in my classroom. Iruka declared firmly, eyes boring heatedly into the eyes of his students. Am I clear? He said. The murmurs seemed loud in the oppressive silence. Yes, sensei. I said, am I clear? The students sat straighter, each replying with a firm, yes, sensei. I'll say this just once. Iruka started, hands resting on his hips. You are expected to be shinobi, and there are expectations that shinobi must complete. As a shinobi, you are expected to conduct yourself in a manner befitting Konoha, especially because your actions will reflect on Konoha. Not only that, but when you graduate, you will be sorted into 3-man cells and teamwork is essential. Iruka stressed. His eyes roved across the classroom and he felt a sense of sadness as his eyes landed on Asuka. She was curled in on herself, almost defensive, but almost a moment later she sat straight, face carefully neutral. Now then, would you like to reintroduce yourself, Asuka-chan? Asuka shook her head. She didn't think she'd be able to speak. Her throat felt tight and she felt like the second she opened her mouth, she felt that she might regret it. Iruka gave a small sigh at the action before he motioned towards a student. Continue. The rest of the class was easy. Iruka merely gave a summary of what they were expected to do, what they were going to do in question of training and teaching, seeing as they were going to have Iruka as a teacher for the next 4 years as well as other pertinent things. Asuka listened attentively, taking notes of what she deemed important, and while some of the subjects intrigued and excited her, any good mood she felt was dampened by what had happened earlier. She had thought that her days of the orphanage was over, that she wouldn't have to ever think back to those days, but it seemed that fate had other plans. Fear serves no purpose, Asuka reminded herself. They were the first master's words and they served to comfort her. It reminded her of the promise that she had made to herself and to Fairy Tail and her brothers. Forge ahead and your path will unfold. And my path will be one of strength and greatness. This is just a momentary obstacle. She took a steady breath, trying to shake off the despondent feeling that had settled over her. She couldn't keep letting these instances get to her. People like that weren't worth it, so why should she care for their opinions? There was a determination in her that burned as brightly as the will of fire, and damn if she was going to let anyone else stifle it out. Let them try. She may have been kinder and gentler than her brothers, but a dragon was still a dragon. There was nothing in the world that quite compared to the rage and anger of a dragon. Sensing the glares of her classmates on her back, Asuka merely turned and smiled serenely as if there was nothing wrong. Class was over before they knew it, and Asuka packed her things away. She disregarded the looks sent her way and instead contemplated over the outline that they were given over what they were going to learn for the rest of the year. Most of what was being taught was easy, as she already knew nearly everything that was being taught. It was basically an introduction to chakra and chakra theory, history of the elemental nations and geography, nature transformation and elements, a glossing over hand signs, math, surprisingly, and much more. The second year was when things would get more hands-on. Some of the things that they would get started on that year was weapons training as well as sparring. They'd also learn the basic academy taijutsu, and even chakra theorem. This was also when the girls and boys would get separated a few times so they could learn some gender-related skills, although Asuka couldn't figure out how flower arrangement would help in battle. It may hold some use in intelligence and espionage, in some vague and mystic way. She wasn't really sure. During the third year, things would get more intense. It was when they would learn how to think more critically, tactfully and intelligently. They would learn the theory and application of basic jutsu such as the kawarimi, bushin, and transformation technique. Testing, unfortunately, would be more frequent, but Asuka understood the necessity. There was more, but Asuka couldn't be bothered to remember at the moment as she was occupied by thought of ranking. It seemed that the best female and male academy student would be awarded the title of Rookie of the Year, and Asuka was determined to be that person. Every year, nothing less would be satisfying, but that didn't mean that she was going to use all of her abilities. She had already decided that she was going to do enough to be on top, but low enough to still be a bit underestimated. She knew that it was better that way, at least for now, and that way, she could surprise her opponents and enemies. Asuka wished that there would be someone to challenge her in the academy, but as she looks around and saw the girls surrounding and fawning over the young Uchiha, she knew that wouldn't find any, at least not in the girls. It was a shame, especially since she's heard shinobi frequently mention how kunoichi were gaining a bad reputation. They said that the kunoichi title was being slandered due to the unbefitting attitude that most female academy and genin were adopting. It was a shame, but Asuka dearly and sincerely hoped that they took things more seriously. Asuka made her way to the door, intending to leave, but she was stopped before she could. "Asuka-chan, please wait," Iruka called out. Asuka did so, a slight frown pulling at her lips. "Can I help you, Iruka-sensei?" Iruka watched as the last of the students filed out and he closed the door gently. He turned towards her and knelt down so he could face her properly. He had a serious look on his face as well as concern. "Asuka, are you alright?" he asked. Asuka blinked, hands tightening ever so slightly around her bag. "What do you mean? What happened today was very serious, Asuka-chan. The way that they treated you was improper." "I know, sensei," she replied. "I just wanted to let you know that I was going to talk to the parents of those that had bullied you and I was going to get them to apologize." "Please don't, Iruka-sensei," she interrupted. "That's not necessary. It will only cause more problems, Iruka-sensei, and besides, I don't want their apologies if they're not going to offer them on their own free will. I don't think they'd be very sincere otherwise." "She's very mature," Iruka noted, "but she seems so familiar too. Have I met her somewhere before?" He didn't think he's met her before. He could almost swear it, but she just seemed so familiar for some reason. Absently, he brushed the thought away. There were other things to be concerned about, like the possibly onset of bullying. "Are you sure? I can still talk to their parents if you want." Asuka shook her head, a small smile of appreciation appearing on her face. "No, it's fine, sensei. I'd rather not make a big deal out of this." "A big deal? Bullying is very serious, Asuka-chan," Iruka said sternly. Asuka nodded seriously. "I understand, Iruka-sensei, I do. It's just that I can take care of myself, and besides, the others would dislike me even more if their parents caught wind of this. And besides, I don't think they'll have the reaction that you're expecting, Iruka-sensei. Well, if you're sure, Asuka-chan. Just make sure to come to me if you need anything, Iruka said sincerely and sternly. Asuka nodded, giving the other a smile. She wasn't sure if she was actually going to go to the other for anything, but who knew what the future held in store. Iruka-sensei doesn't seem too bad. Thank you for everything, Iruka-sensei. Of course. Get home safely, okay, Asuka-chan. As Asuka walked the streets, she idly wondered what she was going to do next in training. It'd take a while yet for her to increase her training weights. She was always practicing her Bukajutsu, use of weapons in battle. In fact, she was always practicing and improving skills she's acquired so far in order to better hone them and keep in shape. She could always use a new jutsu as well. In fact, she had a few in mind that she wanted to master next. The Kage Bushin, Shadow Clone, was a technique she spotted a few select shinobi use. She hadn't thought anything of it at first when she saw it. She'd thought that they had merely been the standard Bushin, but she had sensed the amount of chakra they had contained, which were immensely greater, and they held a greater capacity to take damage. Seen as opposed to the standard clone technique, they were corporeal. Intensive research had led to findings that had pleased her greatly. Apparently, there were different variations of clones, ranging from different elements to more, and the shadow clone specifically allowed for memories to be shared. The reason that it wasn't so common, however, was the fact that they held a fraction of the chakra held by the user. It made sense now. That's why people weren't spamming clones everywhere, because the amount of chakra used wasn't worth it to most. Asuka, however, wasn't held to standard limitations and was more than willing to test it. It might have been a bit impulsive, but it was a trait she had learned from her brothers. It wouldn't hurt to be a bit spontaneous every now and then, and besides, she was ecstatic at the way that the technique might change her training. Her training could be greatly increased and the amount of time shortened. There were so many possibilities. The next technique was more complex than anything she's ever tried, that being the mystical palm technique, a medical ninjutsu that allowed the user to speed up the body's natural healing process by sending chakra from their hands into a wound or affected area. It was a very useful technique, a very hard one to master, but Asuka was nothing but determined to learn it in the least amount possible, or at the very least, before she graduated from the academy. Last but not least, she was going to learn another lightning jutsu, lightning style. Depth charge, Raiden. Bakurai. It was a technique almost reminiscent of Laxus's lightning when it enveloped him completely, harming anyone that dared to come near. In this case, the user would envelope themselves with lightning chakra, and then, the user could inflict damage to the opponent by touching them or emanating a powerful bolt of electricity from any part of their body. I think that I'm making good progress, Asuka thought happily. If I continue the way I am, I think I might get to Chunin level soon. She giggled happily at the thought. Although no one would know until it's too late. Never underestimate the little guy. Maybe I should visit the library soon. Asuka mused aloud. It'd be nice to visit Soma-san and Masaru-san. Besides, there are a couple books that I need to get. It was amazing what one could find in the library. There was always something fascinating or useful to be found. It was no wonder that Levi loved books the way she did. You could find anything in the right book. Right now, though, her particular fascination lay with Konoha and its founders and the era of the warring clans in general. It's amazing how much things have changed since then. Asuka turned her gaze to the towering faces that watched over the village. The Hokage Mountain was one of the most amazing things that she's seen. But what I want to know is why the history between the Senju and Uchiha clans is so vague. There aren't a lot of books on them, but it's not unusual considering that they're clans. They tend to keep everything a secret. Still, she sighed, turning away and began making her way home. Maybe I should make some pasta for dinner. I haven't had that in a while. As she was walking, however, she heard the sound of a commotion and curiously, she followed the sound only to see Naruto running down the street with an unrepentant grin on his face. There's something odd about him, Asuka noted. His scent reminds me of. She took a deeper breath, the scent nagging at her. It smelled so familiar. He smells like a fox? She watched as he gave a mocking smile towards his angry pursuers. That's oddly fitting. She smiled. All right, class. Iruka started, shuffling papers in his hands idly. It's time for lunch. You're dismissed. he announced, a small underlying tone of relief in his tone. Dealing with hyperactive children tended to require an immense amount of patience. Not to mention the trouble that they tended to get through. As soon as he finished, the students scattered quickly to go outside and wander off. Wendy, however, instead chose to stay inside for the day. Usually, she would eat outside under a particular tree that she had claimed for herself or even the academy's rooftop. This time though, she just wanted to savor the quiet peacefulness that the classroom afforded. Although, Asuka stared at a figure that snuck in through a window quietly. I guess I wasn't the one with the same idea. The other stared at her with a challenging gaze, as if daring her to say anything. Asuka merely gave the other a small smile and a nod. "Uchiha-san," she greeted. The Uchiha stared at her for a moment before turning away and sitting at his usual seat as he dug into his own lunch. He disregarded her, the only other person in the room. Asuka ate her lunch, a bento made of her leftover dinner. She read a book while she ate, eyes roving over the pages quickly and intently. Konoha was founded by the Senju and Uchiha clans. Konoha was the first of its kind, the first hidden village in the elemental nations. It was an unprecedented idea considering the state of the times and ideals, but it was said that Senju Hashirama and Uchiha Madara had a wish for peace, and so the village was created in. She looked up from her book, head turning slightly to the side as if to listen better. "I thought I heard something," she thought. "Where are you?" A high-pitched voice called out. "Are you here? Sasuke-kun, Sasu-kun." She turned her gaze towards the Uchiha and she could practically sense the radiating discontent coming from the Uchiha, but she didn't really need to. It was clear enough in his furrowed eyebrows and narrowed eyes. "Fangirls?" she wondered. "That makes sense," she muttered to herself. They were well into the first year of the academy and the young Uchiha had already gained swarms of fangirls that increased by the day. It made Asuka frown slightly because the behavior that some of the girls displayed was extreme. There was the sound of pounding footsteps and raised voices, and Asuka turned her gaze to the Uchiha, who was once again muttering curses under his breath and was making his way to the window, intent on escape, but he paused and a look of extreme discontent filtered over his face before it was gone a moment later. Asuka looked out the window and she could see the girls scouring the grounds for the Uchiha. It seemed that no matter where he went, the Uchiha couldn't find a moment of reprieve from the hordes of overeager girls. It made Asuka shudder in sympathy. Juvia had seemed like a fangirl as well, and there were at times that her actions were unusual and extreme to an extent, but Asuka knew that her feelings for Gray were genuine. Juvia had told her that she had loved Gray when he had first shown him kindness, back when the world rained constantly around her. He had shown her the beauty and warmth of sunlight. The fangirls seemed to have less than genuine intentions, considering what she's heard. Asuka had no doubt that the Uchiha knew as well. He was young, but he wasn't stupid. Far from it. Asuka placed aside her bento and she stood, idly wiping the imaginary dust from her clothes. She made her way to the classroom door, disregarding Sasuke's tense form. She went out the classroom and carefully closed it behind her, looking like for all intents and purposes she was going out. "Hey you," a girl called out, skidding to a stop before Asuka. There were other girls close behind, all of them wearing disgruntled looks. Whether it was because they couldn't find the Uchiha or if it was because of Asuka herself, she didn't know, nor did she particularly care, to be honest. "Ah," Asuka muttered. "How can I help you, Amy-san?" she said politely. The girl in question, Amy, looked at Asuka suspiciously. A severe frown was on her lips. "Have you seen Sasuke-kun, orphan?" she snapped. There was a series of snickers and snorted laughs, and more than one girl looked cruelly amused and interested. Asuka's polite smile faltered slightly but remained nonetheless. "Uchiha-san?" She tilted her head to the side, as if contemplating. "I think he went out to the training grounds," she answered. It was an answer that held merit, since it was something that the Uchiha might do. Ino scoffed, "Whatever." She turned and walked away without another word. Sakura glanced at her before a frown took over her face, a vein throbbing violently on her forehead. "Hey, don't think you can get a head start and hog Sasuke-kun all to yourself, Ino pig," she yelled, running after the blonde a moment later. The girls perked up in interest and soon they too were running after the others, shouting and shoving their way as they realized that they would need to hurry lest they miss their chance with their precious Sasuke-kun. Asuka stared at them with heavily lidded eyes for a moment before she quietly made her way back to the classroom. The Uchiha was staring out the window with much less tension than before. "Uchiha-san, the others aren't here anymore. I told them you went to the training grounds," she said, casually sitting back in her seat as if nothing happened. She continued to eat her food in almost elegant gestures. There was silence for a few brief moments, and from the corner of her eye, she saw the black-haired boy move back to his seat, eating his own lunch with much less tension than before. Asuka smiled slightly, not saying a word and merely keeping to herself. When Asuka goes home, she's always greeted by a type of silence that isn't comforting so much as oppressive. Her home is her own, yes, but the apartment is bereft of any items that hint towards a family or anything along those lines. There were scrolls and books scattered all around the living room. Aside from the large single couch she had stretched along a wall and the small coffee table in front of it, there wasn't much to see. The kitchen table was a small thing with only enough chairs to seat 4 people. Asuka dearly hoped to have her team over one day. Maybe they'd take away the silence that lingered so heavily in her home. It almost seemed like an irrational thought and feeling. She couldn't help it, however. There were the days where the silence got to her more than others. Her bedroom was small. A bed was pushed against a corner of the room right along a window that above it. Right beside her bed was a wardrobe that contained the majority of Asuka's shinobi wear. The rest of her more casual clothing was inside her small closet. A full-length mirror was hanged on a wall. It was a small and meager home, but again, it was hers. She wishes that it wasn't so empty. Wished that when she came home she'd be greeted by someone instead of the usual silence. It was hard to get used to, especially because she was always with her brothers and friends. She had moved out of Fairy Hills and instead lived with Natsu and Gajeel in a big house they all built together. Even Laxus had been a semi-permanent figure in the house. It wasn't long until the other Slayers frequented as well and had left definite signs of their presence. It was the best decision that she had made, a sentiment that was also shared among her brothers. The house hadn't been just a place to dwell in. It was a real loving home, and most of all, her most precious people were there too. It was all that she wished for, and as she glanced around her meager, silent apartment, she knew that the two couldn't even compare. "One day," she said, "one day I'll have that again." It was a promise. School seemed to pass by in a blur for Asuka. It was yet again another day in the academy, and by now she's claimed a permanent seat. She sat next to the Uchiha while the other sat beside the window. The remaining free seat that was left beside Asuka was always occupied by series of people. It was a seat that was more reserved for the last person to arrive. People were reluctant to sit next to Asuka, notably the civilians. It hurt, to be honest. To Asuka, it seemed that Sasuke didn't care for her presence, but she got the sense that he preferred to have her than any of the other girls obsessed over him. Children were cruel, Asuka knew, but she never would have guessed to the sheer extent of it. It seemed that her new nickname was Orphan on behalf of many of the students, even those outside her class. Various clan members were baffled at the term, and some even seemed slightly offended, but no one made a move to stop it. Asuka understood. If you were different, you stood out, and children were quick to make judgment if it was the sort of good different or the bad kind of different. If it was something that wasn't approved, then they were quick to point it, quick to judge, quick to label and mock. It was sort of like a herd mentality, and everyone had to follow, and if you went against it, then you were just as bad. No one would want that, because then it meant that they would pick on them next. It was a fear of retaliation. She spent her days alone and idly watched the world around her. When group projects and assignments, Asuka frequently requested that she work alone, so much so that Iruka allowed for it without her needing to ask anymore. She didn't want to see the others pick her last again, and anyone that was assigned to her would be uncooperative, and that was the nicer way of putting it. He'd give her concerned looks and frowns of contemplation, but since she never really made a complaint, he never did anything. She could have worked with Sasuke, but the other was snatched away by the girls before Asuka could do anything. Not to mention that the few, rare times that Asuka did manage to, it would incite the rage of the girls to a point that was simply astounding. This was one of those few times. "I'll be back, class. Keep working on your assignments," Iruka announced sternly before leaving the classroom, closing the door behind him as he did so. Their assignment was fairly easy and straightforward. It was a packet of key terms that they had to complete relating to a broad range of shinobi fields, from chakra to elemental affinities and even to weapons. Both students were required to place effort, and Iruka had warned that he'd know if they weren't helping their partners. He was scary that way. So far, Asuka and Sasuke had worked in silence. Speaking wasn't really necessary. They had just divided the terms evenly between them, not even asking if the other knew them or not, and filled their part, passing it to the other when they finished their assigned portion. Asuka was confident that Sasuke could complete it without her aid and easily get them all correct. She knew she could too. The entirety of the class was silent for a moment, staring at the door before there was a cacophony of sound, the sound of children free of authority. "Asuka, switch with me." A pink-haired form ambled towards Asuka's way, green eyes glaring fiercely towards the blue-haired girl. "I can help Sasuke-kun better than you can." Asuka frowned, glancing towards the Uchiha who held his usual impassive gaze. "Haruno-san, I don't think we can switch." "Of course not," a voice called out, and Ino shoved Sakura away from where she stood before their desk. "You can't switch with her because you're switching with me," Ino declared haughtily, sweeping her blonde hair away from her face with an elegant gesture that gained jealous looks from the other girls. "Move out the way, Asuka. If you think that Sasuke-kun is going to work with either of you, then you're just as stupid as you look," Amy declared, hands on her hips and sneering down at them. Her words incited the rage of the two girls immediately. "What did you just say?" Ino hissed, hands clenched into fists and glaring quite ferociously towards the other girl. "Say that again, I dare you," Sakura yelled, rage in her eyes and a vein throbbing threateningly on her forehead. "Oh, she did not just say that," a voice muttered through the sudden silence of the room. "Troublesome." Amy smirked in a manner that really shouldn't have been possible for a girl her age. She pushed the girls away without a care, ignoring their indignant yells. She slammed her hands on the desk, rattling the pencils and causing them to fall to the floor, but she ignored it. Ami's eyes were boring into Asuka's and was leaning towards her with intent. "Get the hell out of the seat, orphan," she said threateningly. There was a strangled sound, seeming to come from all around the room at once. "Oh my god," the recognizable voice of one Inuzuka Kiba said. "What? Just what? Why do they keep saying that, Shikamaru?" Choji whispered, trying to be quiet, but in the pin-drop silence, it was impossible. "Hell if I know, Choji," Shikamaru replied, dark eyes boring towards the scene before him. "What is wrong with these people? Why just her? I know for a fact that there's more than one in this class." "So why?" Asuka stood still, jaw clenched and teeth gritting with enough force to grind the strongest of steel into dust. The word seemed to echo in her ears, and it was repeated in her mind like a demented mantra of orphan, 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 orphanopran. With her best efforts, Asuka stretched her lips into a feeble, polite smile. It was a pitiful attempt and nowhere near what she was capable of, but the word hurt. As if she needed to be reminded. "Please don't call me that, Amy-san," Asuka said, voice sweet and carefully polite as always. Amy smirked, leaning forward with unforgiving intent. "Why? You don't like it? I thought it was a nice nickname." "It certainly sounds nice to me," she said mockingly. "Here, just listen. Maybe you'll see what I mean, orphan. I mean that's what you are, aren't you, orphan?" Her smirk stretched into a smile full of teeth. "Orphan, orphan, orphan," she repeated, giggling all while she did so. "Amy-san," Asuka said, hands hidden beneath the desk. Her face was burning hot and she could feel the stares of her classmates burning into her back. Her palms were sweaty, her heart was pounding, and she was feeling a sense of nervousness, a sense of nausea, and idly, she wondered if this was what her brothers often felt when boarding different forms of transportation. "Please stop that." Amy gave a booming laugh. "Orphan," she whispered. "Orphan, orphan, orphan," she repeated, hands pounding the desk rhythmically with each time she did so, her voice steadily getting louder until, suddenly the majority of the class joined in. There was the sound of hands hitting the desk, joining Ami's own rhythm, and the voices of her classmates melded into a single voice. "Orphan, orphan, orphan," they repeated, and Amy egged them on. She motioned with her hands her encouragement and she laughed. Asuka's eyes were wide and her breath was stuck in her throat. Her heart was pounding quite fiercely now, and the sound of their voices grated harshly in her ears. "Stop," she whispered, swallowing heavily to try to rid the tight ball of emotion in her throat. "Stop," she said. "Orphan," they continued, and they pointed mocking fingers towards Asuka, taking delight in her discomfort. The others didn't know what to do, namely the clan children. They've never seen such an act of bullying, and it was quite possibly the worst that they've ever seen before. They've seen children fight with one another, seen others call each other names, but none of that could quite compare to what they were seeing now. It was impossible to look away. The scene demanded their attention, and it was horrifying to watch, and so bewitched were they that they could nothing but sit still in their seats. Not one of them made a move. Not Shino. Not Hinata, Shikamaru or Choji. Not Kiba or Sasuke. Not even Naruto, whom watched in the same horrifying manner as the rest. Orphan, orphan, orphan. Asuka's form trembled slightly and her bangs obscured her face. She wanted to cover her ears, wanted to block it all out, but it was ingrained deeply in her mind now. Stop, she repeated, her voice slightly wavering. Orphan, 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 orph. I said stop. Asuka all but screamed, hands slamming violently on the desk. She barely managed to hold back her strength, yet still in the sudden, stifling silence it creaked ominously. She was trembling and heaving for breath, her heart pounding violently and her skin turned cold and clammy. The door slammed open and Iruka walked in, others following closely behind. What is going on here? He demanded. His eyes took in the sudden silence, the pale-faced looks of half of his students and the other half with innocent expressions. Oh, nothing sensei, Amy said, nervousness seeping into her somewhat. Asuka bit her lip violently and without a word ran out of the room without a second thought or glance back. Asuka, Iruka called, torn between following her or demanding answers from his class. Don't worry about her sensei, a boy said surprisingly coolly. Amy, Sakura and Ino wanted to switch with Asuka to be with Uchiha-san, but when they saw her they noticed that she didn't look all that good. They were concerned, but Asuka-san must have really been feeling bad to have run out of here so fast. Another girl continued, nodding along with the previous words. I hope she feels better. She added a moment later, her tone worried. Others nodded along with hers, giving sympathetic murmurs. Poor Asuka-chan. She did look bad, didn't she? I hope I don't get sick. I know, right? It looked bad. I wouldn't want to catch that. Iruka's eyes bored into his students intently. He knew that they were lying, but everyone was in on it, it seemed. He stared at the faces of each of his students, hoping that at least one of them would offer something. Not one of them did. Shizuka-sensei, could you? Iruka started, but the kunoichi was already shaking her head in understanding. Go Iruka, I'll watch over your class, she said, moving towards the center of the classroom with a calculating look in her eye. Iruka shouted his thanks over his shoulder, trying to sense where it is that his student ran to. He scoured the entirety of the academy, yet he couldn't find any sign of Asuka. Where could she be? He wondered worriedly. Did she leave the academy grounds? I hope she didn't. I don't know where she lives. He didn't see her for the rest of the day. Asuka was deeply hurt by the incident, but she gave no indication of it when she returned to the academy the next day. She had heard the whispers behind her back, felt the points and stares, but she kept her head held high despite the feeling of emptiness that welled in her. Her tears had all but ran out. When she left the academy, Asuka didn't go to her apartment, didn't go to the Hokage or even Masaru and Kenta, but to the Forest of Death. She ran blindly, not caring for the scratches that she gained by the branches of the trees. She didn't care for her torn clothes or about the fact that her hair were no longer in her neat pigtails. She didn't care for anything at the moment, really. How could she when the voices of her classmates were taunting her, echoing unceasingly in her mind? When she was cruelly reminded of the fact of how truly alone she was. Of her treatment in that damnable orphanage? She had stumbled before the emblem of fairy tale, before the gleaming and carefully polished stones that represented her brothers. A sob hitched in her throat and her small hands obscuring her face as tears slipped between the gaps of her fingers. I can't, she shuddered violently, voice breaking in a manner that would have broken hearts, in a manner that would incited a tremendous rage in her brothers. I didn't want to believe that they could be so cruel. She shook her head, hair falling around her like a dark curtain of royal blue. I can't do this without you, Ni-san. She didn't even know who she was calling for, didn't even really care. It hurts, Mavis, it hurts. Another sob broke out, tremors increasing in violence. I know that I should be stronger, I know that I should be better than this. But, she gave a low, broken sound. I'm not, and I'm sorry. It was irrational, she knew, apologizing when she did nothing wrong, but she feels as like she's failed. Feels that she's failed as a slayer, as a fairy tale mage, as a fledgling shinobi. She's worked hard since the beginning, since she was reborn and had regained awareness. She had made a promise to be greater and stronger, but the words of her supposed future comrades had hurt deeply. Still, as she cried until she couldn't anymore, the world turned dark around her and she didn't even notice or care. In the end, she stared listlessly towards the monument that seemed to glow softly under the moonlight and fireflies. "I'm sorry," she said, voice hoarse. Iruka had hounded Asuka when she returned back to the academy. He had given her a worried look and his eyes had been searching, looking for anything that would give any indication as to what happened. He could see her bloodshot eyes, see the dark bruising beneath them. Her clothes seemed messier than normal and her hair unkempt, lacking their usual adornments. "Are you okay, Asuka-chan?" he asked, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Cammy, she felt so frail and thin Iruka was half afraid the wind would blow her away. Asuka stayed silent for a moment, staring at the floor for a moment before she looked up towards her teacher with an apologetic smile on her face despite the gnawing emptiness she still felt. "I'm sorry I worried you, Iruka-sensei." Iruka stared at her for a moment before nodding. "Are you feeling better?" he said carefully. "The others said that you were sick." Of course, they would make an excuse. Of course, everyone would be in on it. No one would say a word otherwise because that would have been very unwise unless they felt particularly daring or fearless. No one wanted to be a snitch either. Not to mention, the dissension from the majority could lead to unpleasant outcomes. Asuka wasn't stupid enough to think that everyone was out to get her. There were polite children in her class, such as the clan members, but she knew that they wouldn't speak up either. There could have been many reasons why. Maybe they felt that it wasn't their place to interfere. Maybe they felt fear because they were afraid of the retaliation. Children were cruel and quick to judge. There was a herd-like mentality that everyone followed. If you were different, you would be judged whether it was the good kind of different or the bad kind of different. If you were the bad kind, then that was unfortunate. The clan members were polite to Asuka with the exception of Ino, and Naruto was largely oblivious to all the girls that weren't Sakura just as she was to them, but still they had said nothing. Asuka couldn't blame them. It wasn't lost to her that despite her outward appearance, she was a lot older than any of her classmates. They were young and maybe they had simply unsure of what to do. It was disappointing, but Asuka accepted it nonetheless. "Ah," Asuka murmured, "of course. I'm doing better, Iruka-sensei. I just didn't expect to feel that bad." Iruka stared at her for a moment longer, but he nodded in resigned acceptance. "Well, if you're sure, Asuka-chan. Go sit down please. I have an announcement to make." Asuka sat in her usual seat despite the stares that bore into her back. In all her time in the academy she had been the only girl to sit next to the Uchiha, despite the claim she had on the seat. It never failed to incite the jealousy of the girls. She sat with her head held high and back straight. Her tears had run dry before the memorial she had built, and the emptiness had made room for something else. Anger. Asuka was a gentle soul. She liked to be kind, but there was a limit to how much she could tolerate. She had realized that while their words hurt deeply, she could stop it. They were words falling from the lips of those that didn't even know her and were quick to judge, quick to slander. Why should she care about what they had to say? She held no love towards them and any chance of friendship ended. She liked to believe in second chances too, but she had a feeling that there wouldn't be any for many of them. "Settle down class. I have an announcement to make," Iruka said, waiting for the murmurs and whispers to die, and nodded in satisfaction when they did. His eyes moved from student to student intently. As is traditional, at the end of the year there is always a title awarded to the best academy female and male student called Rookie of the Year. This year is no different, and I'm announcing those who gained this title. Remember, time has passed by quickly, but this is by no means the end of your journey," Iruka said sagely. There were murmurs and the sound of fierce whispers once again, but they died down immediately under Iruka's glare. "Now, as I was saying, the rookies of the year for this year are..." Iruka took a moment to savor the tension. "Uchiha Sasuke." There was an immediate round of cheers in response on behalf of the girls, most of them staring dreamily and adoringly towards the Uchiha. Asuka blinked and she merely gave the Uchiha a nod of congratulations, unsurprised that the Uchiha had gained the title. There were others that could have gained the title as well, namely the clan children and even Naruto, but many of them lacked the single-minded focus and drive that the Uchiha held. The Uchiha accepted her nod with a slight incline of his head. Nothing else but first would have been acceptable. Kya tilde, a girl squealed. I knew he could do it. You're amazing, Sasuke-kun. Amy complimented. Congratulations Sasuke-kun, Sakura said, hands clasped together cutely and hearts in her eyes as she stared at the young Uchiha. Congratulations Sasuke-kun, Ino said not a moment later, her rivalry for Sasuke's affections rearing up. I knew you could do it. No one could have done better. There was a series of annoyed groans on behalf of the boys. Not for the first time, Kiba rolled his eyes so hard he may as well have strained them. What do they see in him? He muttered, giving voice to a thought that had plagued the minds of the other boys numerous times. He didn't think he'd ever be able to understand the mysterious mentality of the girls. Iruka pinched the bridge of his nose, wondering why he expected differently. Quiet, Iruka yelled, savoring the silence that followed. He still had his touch. Good, as I was saying, Iruka said, clearing his throat slightly. Congratulations Asuka, for gaining the title of Rookie of the Year. He said, a smile on his face. There was silence for a moment before chaos erupted. What? Sakura shrieked, causing more than one to wince. Her? There must be some sort of mistake. She yelled. Ino nodded, completely disregarding the fact that she agreed with her rival. Billboard Brow is right, there must be some sort of mistake. Other girls nodded along her words, a look of anger on their faces. A no-name like her Rookie of the Year? Amy hissed under her breath. That can't be right sensei. She said, hands slamming atop the desk. Enough, Iruka yelled, demanding the attention of his students. There was no mistake, Iruka said sternly, shaking his head at the denials about to be said. You were close to becoming Rookie of the Year Sakura, third in place in fact, and in second place was Hinata-chan. His words caused the shy Hyuga to blush violently and a moment later she fainted. But Asuka-chan held the highest test scores and had the highest taijutsu and weapon training scores among the girls. But, Sakura stuttered, glaring daggers towards the blue-haired girl. Don't worry Sakura-chan, Naruto said, trying to comfort his crush. You're first in my eyes. He said passionately, to no avail as the pink cat completely disregarded him. Asuka blinked in surprise, despite expecting the title. She knew that she was the best. It wasn't arrogance but it was a fact. A feeling of elation and happiness spread through her and her sensei's words reminded her of her goals. She had sworn to be strong, to be the best and she accomplished just that. She disregarded the looks that the girls gave her. Their words held no weight in her mind and she was reminded again, that a dragon was still a dragon. A voice that sounded suspiciously like Laxus whispered in her mind, of course. Of course, you're the strongest. They're not even worth the dirt beneath your feet. There's nothing in the world that compares to the strength of a dragon. Her smile bloomed to a genuine grin as she saw Sasuke give her his own nod of acknowledgement. The streets are quiet early in the morning and it made Asuka feel a sense of contentment, despite everything that's happened. She makes her way to her destination with long and steady strides. She has her backpack on and a bouquet of flowers in her arms, all with different meanings that ranged from happiness to sadness. The path that she takes is familiar, winding through the forest of death and into its dark depths. She completely disregards the sounds of menacing animals in the distance, disregards the shadows that would have had any lesser person second-guessing each step. A clearing comes into view after a long walk, almost seeming out of place in the forest of death with its beauty. It was cleverly hidden and so deep into the forest that there was an extremely minimal chance of it being found, not to mention the amateurish seals that aided in the fact. The field was completely covered in wildflowers, displaying an impressive range of colors from red to orange, blue to violet. It was amazing. What stood out the most, however, was the heavy-set stone that laid among the flowers. The stone was more of a small boulder it seemed, styled into a bird-like emblem with careful and dedicated precision. It was the iconic fairy tale guild mark. 6 smaller rocks surrounded it, each equally sized and spaced from one another. Each rock had neatly carved kanji, a painstaking thing to do. Fire, iron, lightning, light, shadow, poison. It was a monument that was handmade by Asuka. At first, she hadn't been sure why she had created it in the first place, but now, as she carefully sat in front of it, She realized that it was for comfort. It made her feel as if she had a part of fairy tale with her even though they weren't physically there with her. She held them dear in her heart, fairy tale and her brothers that is, but it helped to have a something solid, something she could touch. Everyone, she said, pulling her arms around her legs, you wouldn't guess what happened today. Her eyes were stinging with tears despite the smile that was on her face. I was ranked as Rookie of the Year. That's all for now. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments.